I'm Rose. As I walked into my mother's house, the warm scent of roasted chicken and baked potatoes filled the air. I was expecting a usual family gathering, the kind where we catch up over a good meal, share some laughs, indulge in a bit of playful banter, and perhaps even witness a touch of the typical family drama, but nothing prepared me for what was about to happen. The moment I stepped in, I was greeted with warm hugs and loud greetings. My sister Lily, who was visibly pregnant, gave me a tight hug. "You look great, Rose," she said, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Dinner was served, and the conversation started off lightheartedly. Dad went on about his latest fishing trip, while Aunt Mabel took her usual opportunity to complain about her neighbors. For a while, everything felt familiar, normal. Then, as we neared the end of our meal, my mother cleared her throat, signaling something serious. The room suddenly fell silent. I glanced around, sensing the tension. "Rose," my mom began, her voice somber, "there's something important we need to talk about." Her words felt heavy, and I noticed Lily avoiding my gaze. My heart tightened. "What is it? Is everything okay with the baby?" I asked, concerned. "The baby's fine," Mom reassured me. "It's just Lily is struggling a bit. Her apartment is too small, especially with a baby on the way." I waited for her to continue, a growing sense of unease washing over me. "We think it would be best if Lily moved into your house," Mom finally said. Her tone was matter of fact, but her words felt like a bombshell. I blinked, trying to process. "My house?" I managed to stammer. "You want me to give up my home?" "It's only temporary, dear," Mom quickly added, trying to ease the tension. "Just until Lily gets back on her feet. You have the space, and it's such a safe neighborhood for a child." I looked around the table, feeling a swirl of emotions. No one would meet my gaze, except Aunt Mabel, who nodded vigorously as though it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "But I've worked so hard for that house, it's my home," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I know, honey," Mom said softly, "but family comes first, and Lily really needs this." Lily finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rose, I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice." I felt a flood of emotions, anger, disbelief, guilt. How could they ask this of me, to give up the home I had built for myself? "Can we talk about this later?" I said, struggling to keep my composure. "I need time to process." Mom looked disappointed but nodded. "Of course, dear, we can discuss it later." The rest of the evening passed in a blur, the weight of the conversation hanging heavy in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling of being blindsided by my family, and I left that night with far more on my mind than I had anticipated. I couldn't focus on the conversation. My mind was spinning from the shock of the request. It wasn't just the fact that they wanted me to give up my home, it was how they did it, in front of everyone, putting me on the spot, as if they expected me to agree without hesitation or questions. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling of betrayal. The very people who were supposed to support and understand me, my family, were now asking me to sacrifice something deeply personal. My house wasn't just a place, it was my sanctuary, my achievement, the result of my hard work. Lying in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The house wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was filled with memories, dreams, and the sense of independence I had built for myself. The thought of giving it up felt unbearable, yet the guilt of possibly letting down my sister, Lily, and the rest of my family weighed heavily on me. I knew this wasn't just a simple request. It felt like a test of my loyalty to them, a challenge to my independence, and I was torn, pulled between wanting to meet their expectations and standing up for myself. That family dinner had set the stage for a conflict I wasn't prepared for, a challenge that would test my resolve in ways I hadn't imagined. As I finally drifted off to sleep, one thing was clear. The days ahead were going to be some of the toughest I had ever faced. The next morning, I found myself at my desk early, still distracted by everything that had happened the night before. The request to give up my home weighed on me heavily. It wasn't just a house, it was a place I had poured my heart and soul into, and paying the mortgage had been a struggle I was proud of overcoming. As I tried to immerse myself in work, my colleague and close friend, Mark, noticed the strain on my face. "Hey Rose, you seem off today. What's going on?" he asked, leaning against my desk. I sighed deeply, my emotions still raw. "It's a family thing," I explained. "They want me to give up my house for Lily." Mark's eyes widened in surprise. "Your house? But you've worked so hard for that place." "I know," I said, feeling a lump forming in my throat. "I've put so much effort into paying off that mortgage. And now, just because Lily's pregnant, they expect me to hand it over. As the day went on, my predicament slowly became the topic of discussion around the office. I hadn't meant to share it with everyone, but once Mark knew, the news spread quickly. In the lunchroom, Janet from HR approached me, her expression full of concern. "Rose, I heard about your situation, but don't you think your sister needs the house more than you do? I mean, family is family, right?" she said. Her words hit me hard. I struggled to keep my composure. "It's not that simple, Janet," I replied. "I've sacrificed so much for that house. It's not just a building to me." Later, during a team meeting, I found myself once again lost in thought. The weight of the situation hung over me, and I knew this wasn't a decision I could take lightly, no matter which way I turned. I felt trapped between my love for my family and my own sense of self-worth. As I sat at my desk, trying to focus, I couldn't help but overhear a hushed conversation behind me. "If it were me, I'd just give up the house. That's what family does for each other," one of my colleagues muttered. Hearing that made my heart sink. It was disheartening to feel as though all my hard work and dedication were being dismissed so easily. Yet, not all my coworkers felt the same. Some offered sympathetic nods and words of encouragement, clearly recognizing the unfairness of my situation. The rest of the day felt like a constant tug-of-war between my professional responsibilities and the emotional turmoil brewing inside me. I realized the broader issue wasn't just my family's pressure, but also the societal expectation that family should always come before personal achievements. This expectation seemed to echo in many of the comments I received throughout the day, as though my own efforts and struggles were insignificant next to my role as a sister. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about my identity, my independence, and my right to make decisions for my own life. The pressure from my family was difficult enough, but facing similar attitudes at work highlighted how ingrained these societal norms really were. As I left the office that evening, I felt a strange mix of frustration and clarity. I realized that standing up for myself would be no easy feat, especially when it meant going against what so many people considered to be normal or expected. But the idea of giving in to this pressure, of sacrificing my home and everything it represented, became more and more unthinkable as the day wore on. Driving home, I passed by familiar streets and landmarks, each one a reminder of the journey that had brought me to this point in my life. My house wasn't just a structure, it was a testament to my resilience, my independence, and the countless sacrifices I had made to get here. When I arrived home, I paused for a moment outside, staring at the house I had worked so hard to build and protect. The mere thought of giving it up, especially under such unfair circumstances, only strengthened my resolve. Inside, surrounded by the walls I had painted and the furniture I had carefully chosen, I felt a renewed sense of determination wash over me. I knew the road ahead would be tough, difficult conversations lay in wait, and the relationships with my family might become strained, but deep down, I knew I had to stand up for myself, for what I believed in, and for my right to make choices about my own life. My home represented more than just shelter, it was a symbol of everything I had fought for. That night, as I sat in my living room, I made a decision. I would not give up my house without a fight. I had poured too much of my heart and soul into it to let it go so easily. The pressure I had felt at work that day, the comments and societal expectations, only highlighted the importance of standing firm. It wasn't just about keeping a roof over my head, it was about my dignity, my right to choose my own path, and standing up against norms that so often disregarded individual efforts and achievements. At the local community center, where the weekly neighborhood gathering buzzed with energy and chatter, I realized I wasn't just preparing to defend my house, I was preparing to defend my independence and the life I had built. I had always felt a strong sense of community at the local gatherings, but tonight was different. I wasn't just here for the usual chit-chat, I had come seeking advice about the dilemma with my family and my house. Weaving through the familiar crowd, I exchanged greetings with neighbors until, inevitably, the topic came up. "So, Rose, this thing with your sister and your house must be tough," said Bob, my neighbor from 2 doors down, as he handed me a cup of coffee. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the situation. "It's complicated. I want to support my sister, but giving up my home, that's a big ask." "You've worked too hard for that house, Rose," Sarah from across the street chimed in. "It's unfair to expect you to just give it up." I was grateful for Sarah's support, but not everyone shared her perspective. "Family comes first, Rose," Greg, another neighbor, countered. "Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the people we love." The discussion around me grew as others joined in, their voices rising in agreement or dissent. Some sided with Sarah, while others echoed Greg's view. The debate mirrored the broader societal expectations about family duty versus personal rights. Amidst the buzz, Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly neighbor known for her wisdom and kindness, gestured for me to join her in a quieter corner. Her eyes were filled with empathy as she began to speak. "Rose, I heard about your situation," she said softly. "Many years ago, I faced something similar. My family pressured me to make a sacrifice for my brother. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing." She paused, a look of regret flickering across her face. "But giving in to that pressure is a decision I've regretted ever since. I didn't just lose something valuable, I lost a part of myself, my independence. It took me years to understand the full impact of that choice." Her words hit me hard. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, and I hung on to every word. "Your home," she continued, "is more than just a house. It's a symbol of your hard work and resilience. If you give it up because of family pressure, you might end up feeling like I did, regretful and diminished." I felt a knot in my chest as her words sank in. "I'm scared of making the wrong choice," I confessed quietly. Mrs. Jenkins squeezed my hand, her grip firm but comforting. "It's normal to feel scared, but standing up for yourself isn't just about keeping the house, it's about honoring your efforts and your decisions. You have every right to choose what's best for you, not just what others expect." A wave of emotion washed over me as her advice settled in. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "Your perspective means more than you know." Leaving the community center that evening, I felt a renewed sense of clarity and resolve. The conversation with Mrs. Jenkins, in particular, had given me the courage I needed. Her story was a powerful reminder of the importance of making choices that reflect my true self, rather than simply bending to family pressure. That night, as I lay in bed, thoughts of the upcoming confrontation with my family circled in my mind. It was going to be one of the hardest conversations of my life, but now, more than ever, I felt ready. I was determined to stand my ground. My home represented more than just a place to live, it was a symbol of my journey, my struggles, and everything I had achieved. I couldn't let it go without a fight. With a blend of nerves and determination, I invited my family over, knowing this would be a defining moment. The living room felt charged with tension as my family arrived. Mrs. Thompson, Lily, Dad, and a few aunts and uncles. Their faces displayed a range of emotions, from curiosity to concern. Once everyone settled in, I took a deep breath. "I've asked you all here to talk about the house situation," I began, my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "I understand why you think it's best for Lily to move in here, but I've made my decision." Mrs. Thompson quickly interrupted. "Rose, we're family. You should want to help Lily." "I do want to help Lily," I acknowledged, nodding at her, "but giving up my home isn't the answer. I've worked hard for this house, struggled to pay off every cent of the mortgage. It's not just a building, it's a symbol of my independence." A heavy silence followed as my words settled in the air. I continued, turning to Lily. "You're always welcome to come over if you're in a bind, but I can't give up my home. It's not fair to ask that of me." Lily looked down, her face a mix of disappointment and understanding. Mrs. Thompson, however, was less accepting. "Rose, you're being selfish. Family should come before everything else," she said, her tone sharp. Just then, Uncle Jim spoke up, his voice calm and steady. "I think Rose has a point. We can't expect her to give up everything she's worked for. There has to be another way." Aunt Mabel, siding with Mrs. Thompson, added, "But Lily needs a proper home for the baby. Rose has the space." The room erupted into a whirlwind of opinions. Some family members argued in favor of family duty, while others defended my right to my home and my choices. As the discussion heated up, Dad remained silent. Then, finally, he spoke, cutting through the noise. "Enough, this is Rose's decision, we should respect it." His words brought a slight sense of calm to the room, but the division was clear. Some nodded in agreement, while others, Mrs. Thompson and Aunt Mabel included, looked disappointed, even angry. As the evening drew to a close, the rift within the family was palpable. Some relatives left in frustration, while others stayed behind, offering support and understanding. Despite the tension, I felt an immense sense of empowerment. I had stood my ground, set a boundary, and claimed my right to make my own decisions. It wasn't an easy choice, and the consequences were real, but I knew it was the right one for me. In the days that followed, I found comfort and solidarity in my neighborhood. I hosted a small gathering at my house, inviting neighbors who had stood by me. It was a simple event, full of laughter and shared stories, a sharp contrast to the tension of the family meeting. As we sat in the backyard, enjoying the cool evening breeze, I looked around at the smiling faces of my friends and neighbors. These were my people, those who respected my choices and understood the significance of my journey. The path had been challenging, filled with doubt and difficult conversations, but it had led me to a place of strength and self-assurance. I had learned the value of standing up for myself, of maintaining my independence, and of choosing my own path. As the evening came to a close, I stood in my home, a place that was truly mine, and smiled. Though the future might hold uncertainty and strained relationships, I was ready to face it all on my own terms, in the sanctuary I had fought so hard to keep. Rose's journey has reached its conclusion, but now I have a question for you. If you were in Rose's shoes, would you have made the same decision to keep your house, or would you have sacrificed your home for your sibling? This situation raises profound themes about family duty versus personal rights. What would you prioritize, and why? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please share them in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this story and the important discussion it brings, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more engaging content. Your support helps us continue to bring you stories and conversations that matter.
The sound of the alarm clock cut through the morning silence with its annoying sharp beeping. Cliff opened his eyes, trying to suppress an irritated groan. It seemed like he had just touched the pillow half an hour ago, but the clock already showed 7 a.m. What a mystery. Lately, as a decent young parent, he hadn't been getting enough sleep. Nights were dedicated to his 6-month-old child, Oliver. He and his wife were constantly jumping up at the sound of the calling cry from the crib, reminiscent of a siren's wail. But now the apartment was quiet. The child and his wife were still sleeping. Cliff carefully kissed Kendall on the forehead and then got out of the warm blanket. Unable to rest, he tiptoed to the crib first thing and looked inside. The tiny boy was snoring, his fist nestled under his chubby cheek. Cliff couldn't help but smile. The child was long awaited in their family. The man couldn't be happier about becoming a father, and when people told him that the boy was his spitting image, he would dissolve into a satisfied smile. Such things as children's whims, sleepless nights or dirty diapers seemed like nothing to him. He worked hard, but tried to help his wife with these responsibilities. The man enjoyed playing with his son, bathing him and pushing the stroller for hours along the streets on weekends, just to make sure his son slept in the fresh air. The workday on Monday didn't go well for Cliff, who worked in the field of water purification. There were problems with the delivery of materials, which meant that work at enterprises had to be suspended. Naturally, clients were dissatisfied, and it was up to Cliff to speak with them. By the end of the day, the man dreamed of returning home and hugging his son as soon as possible. But sad surprises in his life were just beginning. When he was stuck in evening traffic on his way home, his wife called on his smartphone. "Hi, Kendall," answered the husband, trying to hold the phone and make a turn at the same time. "Will you come home soon?" his wife asked, her nervousness evident in her voice. The man frowned. What if something had happened to their son? "The city is jam-packed, but I'll be there in 40 minutes for sure," he promised. "Did something happen?" "No," she hurried to reassure her husband. "Everything is fine. Don't hurry." After that, Kendall hung up. The conversation seemed strange to Cliff. Despite his wife's request not to hurry, he hastened home. To his great surprise, he didn't find his wife at home. Their son was sleeping in the crib, but his mother wasn't there. Deciding that she might have gone down to the neighbour, he went to the kitchen to have dinner. But instead of dinner, a note attached to one of the magnets on the refrigerator was waiting for him. His wife wrote, "Rushing." The text was barely legible, and it took him several attempts to understand its essence. He simply couldn't believe his eyes. "Forgive me, Cliff. I can't stay with you and our son. Circumstances have arisen. Tell our son that I love him." Of course, the man thought it was a prank. He started calling Kendall and then her acquaintances, but to no avail. She disappeared. Thus began the new life of Cliff and his son Oliver. Raising a child was difficult, and it was not getting any easier with time. Although numerous blogs that he scoured searching for answers to his questions asserted that it was about to get a little easier. When the baby starts to eat, you will be easier. When the baby takes his first steps, you'll be easier. When he goes to school, you'll be easier. Now, Cliff could answer all such statements categorically, no. There was nothing easy about parenting. Each year brought its own difficulties. At first, the man had to work with the child in his arms while delving into issues of infant feeding. The child sometimes got sick, things got confused, and Cliff's head spun. Then he made a daily schedule of tasks and in a few months learned to handle the responsibilities skillfully. During this time, Kendall had only sent one message, the divorce papers, but she refused custody. Without feeling any pity, Cliff signed the necessary papers and forgot about the woman forever. When Oliver became a schoolboy, his father had to not only deal with the crisis of adulthood, but also attended parent-teacher meetings. He felt like a black sheep among the army of mums. However, all these difficulties did not prevent the father and son from living a happy life. Cliff raised a kind and responsive boy who could stand up for himself and for the weaker ones. Oliver went to karate and swimming from the age of 4. He was healthy and a real source of pride for Cliff. The fact that Kendall once existed in their lives was forgotten. Even Oliver, having asked a couple of questions about his mother in childhood, also stopped thinking about her. Only Kendall herself reminded them of her existence when Oliver turned 18. Oliver was supposed to celebrate with friends at a country house on the weekend. They had rented it. On Tuesday, on his birthday, he and his father gathered for a family dinner, which they planned to finish with a festive cake. Suddenly the doorbell rang. The men glanced at each other. "Are you expecting guests?" Cliff smiled. "Well, actually, no. Everyone already congratulated me." "Maybe Ruby?" Oliver responded and went to open the door. There was a woman he didn't know on the doorstep. The birthday boy looked at the guest in surprise. "Hello?" he said politely. "Oliver, dear," the woman immediately said, and her voice trembled. "Oliver, my boy, how you've grown." She rushed to the astonished Oliver, hugging him tightly. The young man was stunned, stepped back, not understanding what was happening. Cliff saw this scene as he came out of the kitchen. "Kendall," he squeezed out sharply. "What the hell are you doing here?" After half an hour of tears and lamentations from Kendall, the trio sat down in the kitchen. The birthday cake was untouched in the center of the table. "A year ago I became a widow," Kendall began. "My husband was fabulously rich and he left me everything, including his construction company. But it's hard to run the company alone. I need an assistant." "Why do you need us?" asked Cliff, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. "You see, I can't trust anyone," explained Kendall. "Everyone in the company dreams of taking my place, and I decided that I can bring in my own son, and then all the inheritance will go to Oliver. I have no children or heirs. Only you, Oliver. We could leave here for the capital, where you will have many prospects." The woman looked hopefully at her son, while Oliver looked hesitantly at his father, noticing how the man's face turned red and then covered with white spots. "You know what, Kendall? Get out of here and go back where you came from," Cliff growled, barely containing his rage. "I raised my boy for 18 years, and now you come and say that it will be better for him with you? You're insane. Do you even know that he has his own life? He just got into university. He has a girlfriend with whom they have serious relationships. Although, how would you know? Seeing his father's condition, Oliver tried to calm him down by putting his hand on his shoulder. Then he shyly looked at his mother. I'm sorry, but Dad is right. I don't even know you. He shook his head. I have other plans for my life, and I won't abandon Dad, just as he didn't abandon me, unlike you. Kendall tried to convince her son, but he was adamant. Eventually, she left with nothing. However, 2 weeks later, when Cliff returned home, he had a strong sense of déjà vu. The apartment was empty, there was dead silence, and there was a note on the fridge. Dad, this is my chance and I can't miss it. I have no warm feelings for my mother, but I feel that I can achieve more in the city. As soon as I'm on my feet, I'll come back, and I'll be able to help you. You won't need anything. I'm sorry I'm running away like this, but you wouldn't understand me, and wouldn't let me go. Don't look for me, but know that I love you. The man took a step towards the stool to collapse on it. As his legs weakened, he held the note in his trembling hand, feeling the pain spreading in his chest. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Deciding that it was Oliver, who had come to his senses, Cliff rushed to open the door, despite the growing fire in his chest. But on the threshold was Ruby, Oliver's girlfriend. Hello? The blonde smiled briefly. Is Oliver home? His phone isn't answering. The man found no strength to explain anything. He silently handed the crushed note to the girl, and then a particularly sharp pain pierced his heart, and groaning, Cliff grabbed his chest. Oh my God, what's wrong with you? Are you okay? Ruby rushed to the man, who collapsed on the floor, but he could no longer answer. The girl immediately called an ambulance, but they couldn't save the man. It seemed that his heart simply couldn't withstand the second betrayal. Ruby buried him very modestly. Unable to find any other solution, she took some money from the deceased's apartment to pay for the burial, because she had no savings of her own. She hoped that Oliver would come to his father's funeral, but he never showed up. 7 years passed since Oliver's escape and Cliff's funeral. As promised, Oliver not only got back on his feet, but also achieved unprecedented success. He returned to his father as a winner and dreamed of telling him about it. Moreover, he hoped to take his dad with him, show him the capital in a different life. But the apartment greeted him with silence and dust, as if no one had lived there for a very long time. Dumbfounded, Oliver decided to visit his ex-girlfriend, who lived in the next entrance. Ruby opened the door immediately, and Oliver realized that she had not changed at all. Beautiful, with short light hair and naive blue eyes. Hi, he smiled, feeling awkward. Oliver. The girl's eyes widened. But where did you come from? May I come in? He asked, nodding towards the apartment. Ruby nodded, stepping aside and allowing her ex-boyfriend to enter the house. She lived there alone. Her grandmother, who raised the girl, died in a car accident 5 years ago. The girl had not yet gotten married and worked at the local library. However, the girl was reluctant to share the details of her personal life, as if she was not telling me something. Did you come to visit your father's grave? Ruby asked, pouring tea for the man. What? Oliver was baffled. What grave? Ruby looked at him in surprise, but then sadness appeared in her eyes. Don't you know anything, Oliver? I buried your dad. 7 years ago, right after you disappeared, he had a heart attack. That evening they went to the cemetery where his son, kneeling at his father's grave, begged for forgiveness. But it was too late. Oliver decided to stay in his hometown for a while. He increasingly visited his ex-girlfriend. Sometimes he would stop by her workplace, saying he was passing by, or invite her for a walk or dinner together. Thus the old relationship revived, as if a withered plant were generously watered and the sun warmed it up, allowing it to bloom. The young people began to prepare for the wedding. "We have to visit your father's grave before the wedding," Ruby said when the young people were working on the guest list. So a couple of days later, Ruby and Oliver came to the cemetery to share the happy news with his father. When the young people approached the grave and the girls sat down to lay flowers, a little boy appeared next to them. It was already evening, and Ruby even shuddered when the pale boy, like a ghost, emerged from the mist, asking, "I am sorry, do you have any spare change? I'm hungry." The boy was a typical representative of the local beggars, thin, dirty, and sometimes wearing torn clothes. The cemetery was full of such characters, and the guard often chased away those who tried to collect candy or anything else from the graves. Oliver and Ruby exchanged glances, and the man searched his pockets for cash, eventually handing the child a couple of bills. "Aren't you afraid to wander here, boy?" asked Ruby, looking at the child with pain in her heart. He seemed to be around 6 years old. "I'm scared," the child honestly admitted, scratching his head and hiding the money in his pocket. "I wouldn't have come here, but getting a berating from my grandma is even scarier. Maybe the dead won't come out of their graves, but Grandma will definitely beat me if I don't bring money. And the people in the cemetery are kind, unlike in town. They're sad here, that's why they give money. But in the city, they chase me. They even hit me sometimes." "So, you're beaten at home? Does your grandmother make you beg?" Ruby asked, feeling increasingly worried. "Yes," the boy nodded, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Where does your grandmother live?" "Oh, there in the village." The boy waved his hand. Ruby gasped. It was a half-hour drive to the village, and the boy had to walk even longer. It was getting darker and cooler outside. "Oliver, let's at least give him a ride home," Ruby asked her fiancé. He nodded, agreeing with her. They got the boy, who introduced himself as Louis, in the car and drove him home. Oliver lived in an old wooden house, and as soon as they parked next to the gate, an angry old woman came out of it. Despite her advanced age, she moved quickly and strongly. The old woman immediately started shouting at the little boy, scolding him for something and not hesitating to use foul language. Then she even slapped him hard. "What are you doing, woman?" Oliver barked, approaching her. Meanwhile, Ruby ran up to the child, who just flinched and didn't even cry, because he was used to such treatment. "What's your business here? Why are you interfering where you're not wanted?" the old woman screeched. "Who are you anyway?" She looked at Oliver and Ruby and then suddenly fell silent. Her eyes narrowed and she asked, "And you, girl, are you Lisa Hamilton's granddaughter? Answer." "Yes," Ruby nodded fearfully, "but my grandmother died 5 years ago." "Oh, you wretch. Take your freak away. Look at you. You and your grandmother sent that brat to me, and now you've come to teach me upbringing. You should have taken care of yourself, cuckoo. You gave birth, but you refused to raise a child, right?" Ruby listened in complete shock as the old woman's curses poured out of her mouth. "Wait a minute," Oliver interrupted. "We don't understand you. Can you explain what's going on?" And she did. It turned out that when he ran away with his mother, Ruby found out she was pregnant, but she didn't get a chance to tell him since he disappeared. On the day she came to share the news, Oliver's father died. The girl buried him, but didn't know what to do next. Her grandmother urged her to terminate it, but Ruby couldn't get rid of her unborn child. She gave birth to a boy on time, but the baby turned out to be dead. At least, that's what the doctors told Ruby. In reality, her grandmother paid someone to keep quiet and deceived her. Lisa Hamilton believed that they would not be able to raise the child and that her granddaughter would ruin her life. She sent her granddaughter to study in another city, and the child lived with a cleaning worker meanwhile. The elderly woman wanted to send him to an orphanage eventually, but she didn't have time to settle things before she got hit by a car and died. Meanwhile, the cleaner took pity on the child and decided to keep him, but with time she realized it had been a mistake. She was laid off from work, but had to feed and clothe the child. It was difficult to raise him. There was not enough money and her health was failing. She became increasingly angry with the boy each day, considering him a burden, but she couldn't give him away, fearing that she would be prosecuted for that. It would have been difficult to believe her story if Oliver and Ruby did not take a new look at the boy. He turned out to be insanely similar to his parents. That evening, they took Louis to their home. He was suspicious of adults, but he was happy to leave the old woman he used to consider as his grandmother. Ruby hoped that over time the boy would thaw, and she could compensate him with love for all the years that they had been apart. Tears streamed down Ruby's face, and her heart ached with pity for this child. "Perhaps your father brought him to us," Ruby mused when the boy, dressed in his new pajamas, slept in their bed. Oliver remained silent, though he himself thought the same thing. Maybe his father could forgive him after all, and give him the best wedding present ever. 5 years have passed since then. The family's apartment was noisy as usual. Louis teased his 4-year-old sister and threw a pillow at her older brother's laughter. "Children, are you ready yet?" Oliver asked, peeking into his son's room and shaking his head. "Molly, don't strangle your brother. He still has a test to take today." "Dad, why did you have to remind me?" groaned his son from under the pillow. "Molly, squeeze harder. I don't want to go to school." "But I want to go to school," the girl declared. "You're thinking that way now, little piglet," the schoolboy snorted, emerging into the light of day. Oliver didn't notice his wife approaching as he watched the children. She hugged him around the waist, pressing close to her beloved. He smiled, kissing her on the head. "Breakfast is on the table," Ruby said, looking lovingly at the mischievous children. Molly laughed again because Louis started tickling her. The laughter of children, the smell of coffee from the kitchen, the tender smile of his wife. Oliver thought this morning was the most beautiful of his life. But he was wrong. There were many, many more ahead. Marceline was always a kind and somewhat naive girl. During her primary school years, she began fainting, and doctors soon discovered that she had a heart defect. They warned Marceline and her parents that she might not live to adulthood. Despite this, Marceline was determined not to leave this world so soon. At age 17, Marceline fell in love with Paul, married him at 19, and found out she was pregnant at 20. Doctors categorically forbade her from giving birth, warning her of the risks to both her and the child. "Do you understand what a risk this is? Both you and the child can die," frowned the obstetrician gynecologist, urging Marceline to stop the pregnancy. When a woman carries a child, her heart and blood vessels experience tremendous stress. Only a healthy body can cope with it, not yours. But Marceline couldn't imagine getting rid of her beloved child, even though her husband discouraged her from taking such a step. He was worried about his wife, but the young woman was determined. As predicted, Marceline's pregnancy was difficult, and she gave birth prematurely. Doctors had to bring her back from the brink of death, but the son was born healthy. Soon Marceline recovered. From that moment, their small family was happy, until one fateful incident. That evening, Marceline was waiting for her husband and son to come home. Paul was supposed to pick up their child from the football session, where he went after school. Marceline was humming a pop song that got stuck in her head like an old record. She was setting the table, anticipating a family dinner. It was Friday, so it was their tradition. After dinner, they usually played board games. Marceline looked at the clock for the 5th time. Her husband and son were delayed. At that moment, her phone rang. The woman smiled, noticing that her son had called. Ever since Edward got a phone, he used any excuse to call his parents. "Hello, Edward, where are you? Why are you late?" asked his mother. "Mum!" The child's voice, filled with horror, came from the receiver, and the smile vanished from Marceline's face. She sat on a stool, feeling her strength leave her instantly. "What happened?" she whispered, turning pale. "Mum, Dad doesn't move," the child said. The words pierced the woman's heart. Her lips trembled. She closed her eyes and tried to take a breath. "Edward, where are you? Are you okay? Explain what happened." Then Marceline heard the most terrible sound for any mother, her child's crying. It wasn't crying over just a broken knee or because he didn't get a toy. Edward was crying rackingly. We crashed," the child muttered. Marceline jumped up, rushing around the kitchen like a tiger in a cage. Her hand was squeezing the phone so hard that the plastic was about to crack. "Edward, tell me where you are. I'm coming." Marceline realized she had to hang up and call the police, but she couldn't drop her son's call. With a heavy heart and trembling, Marceline reassured her child that everything would be okay and then called the police. They informed her that they had already responded to the scene, and once Marceline learned where the accident had occurred, she rushed there. Upon arrival, she saw her son in the ambulance. The woman rushed to him, feeling a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. "Where's my husband?" she asked. "What happened?" "A truck cut off the car," the officer explained. "Your husband drove straight into it at high speed. The child was in the back in a car seat. He is unharmed. The impact hit the front of the car and crushed it. The man died on the spot. I'm sorry." Marceline felt like her heart had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. However, she knew she had to be strong for her son. She had risked her life to give birth to him, and now she would do everything to make him happy. So Marceline began to live for Edward. She tried to fill the void left by her husband, working hard, going to her son's football matches, and working on her computer at night. Marceline was an advertising designer and had completed courses during her maternity leave. Her talent helped her quickly earn a good reputation among clients. Living without her beloved was difficult. Marceline thought that when Paul died, part of her heart was ripped out of her chest and buried in the ground. However, time passes, and even the deepest wounds can heal. When Edward was 13, Marceline met Ron. Ron was very handsome, especially in his military uniform, since he was an officer. Many years ago, Ron came to the city from the village, enrolled in a military school, and was assigned to the town where Marceline and Edward lived. The future spouses were introduced by mutual friends. Ron immediately fell in love with the modest, sweet Marceline. At first, the woman gently rejected his advances, until her friend tried to talk sense into her. "What's wrong with you, Marceline? Have you gone crazy? Ron is an eligible groom. He has a good job, and you're alone, turning your nose up at such a man. Who else will take you with your boy? Your husband has been dead for a long time. It's time to take off the widow's dress." Marceline was surprised and even offended. "I'm not saying that Ron is bad. It's just not interesting to me." "You're a fool, Marceline. We just want what's best for you," her friend retorted, not expecting resistance. "Think for yourself. Edward also needs a male authority figure. You yourself said that he's thinking about a military school. That's what he needs, a stepfather like Ron. It's unclear what tipped the scales of doubt, the words of Marceline's friends or Ron's courtship, but soon she agreed to go on a date with him. One date led to another, then the third. Ron seemed like a simple, kind person, and his soul was open. If I stayed in my village, I would have definitely drunk myself to death. Ron confessed honestly. There's nothing to do there, only drinking. There is no work at all. And I have a bad inheritance. My father was a heavy drinker. Time passed and Ron quickly found a common language with Marceline's son. They often went out together into nature, to the movies, and to football matches. Gradually, Marceline became attached to Ron. It wasn't the same love she had had for her late husband, but the feelings were sincere and tender. Ron, on the other hand, was head over heels in love with Marceline. Sometimes he acted like a schoolboy in love, showering her with flowers stolen from someone's flower bed, singing songs under her window with his guitar, so the annoyance of their neighbours. At night he wrote her name on the pavement so she could see his artwork from the window in the morning. After a year, Ron found out he was being transferred to a new duty station. So without hesitation, he got down on one knee and proposed to Marceline. "I want to take you and Edward with me," he said, looking into Marceline's eyes. "I can't live without you." Marceline consulted her son because she couldn't make such a decision alone. After all, relocation and a new school could be a tough challenge for a teenager. However, kind-hearted Edward just hugged his mum and congratulated her. "Of course, Mum. Say yes." Edward confidently nodded. "Ron cherishes you. I want you to be happy. Besides, I like him too." But before saying the coveted yes, Marceline sat opposite her fiancé to talk seriously. "I won't be able to give you a child," the woman admitted. "Firstly, I am no longer young, and secondly, I was forbidden to give birth even to my first one. Nowadays, everything seems not so scary, but I remember how I suffered during pregnancy and childbirth. I could die." Ron kissed her hands. "We have Edward, so I will have an heir after all." He smiled. "Trust me, everything will be fine." His words melted the woman's heart. She was tired of being alone, carrying everything on her shoulders like a pack horse. Of course, Edward helped her. He was a wonderful son. However, sometimes she just wanted to lean on a man's shoulder. So Marceline agreed. At first, everything went great, except that Ron drank more often on his new duty station. He usually drank with his military mates and came home swaying. Invariably, he brought his wife a bouquet of flowers so she wouldn't scold him, and explained his condition with various reasons: someone's birthday, promotion, or his own promotion. Marceline understood that her husband's service was very stressful and never scolded him. After all, he didn't drink and rage at home, so why get upset or angry? Family problems began later. When Edward turned 15, he became a copy of his father. When Ron's family was invited to a colleague's anniversary party, one of the wives managed to make an inappropriate joke, not realizing what wound in Ron's heart she had opened. "I wonder who your son takes after. Such a handsome man turned out. He looks like a Hollywood star." "Not your breed at all," she announced in a loud voice and winked at Ron. The man joked then, but for the whole evening he was gloomy and thoughtful. After that incident, something changed within him. He had only just realized that he was raising someone else's son and did not have a child of his own. He started arguing with his wife, constantly reproaching her for not wanting to have a child with him and persuading her to take this step. "Tell me, don't you love me?" Ron would say. "Do you really value your dead husband more than me? I'm alive, Marceline, and I love you. I cherish you. And what you? I warned you that it's dangerous for my health. Women should give birth before 30, and with my heart it's not recommended to have a child at all. But you gave birth to Edward. Was it because you loved your first husband more, huh? Everyone might be laughing at me now. I'm raising someone else's son." Time passed, and Ron would either argue with his wife or try to persuade her with kind words. He would tell her how much he dreamed of having a child and how happy she would make him. In the end, Marceline gave in. When Marceline became pregnant again, she went to the doctor after the 3rd month, fearing that she would be forced to terminate it. The pregnancy went smoothly, which surprised Marceline. There weren't even any surprises like morning sickness or swollen legs. By the 9th month, Marceline had calmed down, preparing to meet her daughter. However, it turned out that the easy path can lead to the abyss, while climbing through thorns can lead to stars. Marceline did not survive the birth and complications arose. The doctors couldn't save her. However, the baby survived. She was a little girl, small and fragile, like a delicate butterfly. She was named Lucy, as her mother had said before she passed away. Unfortunately for Lucy, she lost not only her mother, but also her father on the day of her birth. Ron, having lost his beloved wife, began to search for someone to blame for her death. Deep down he knew he was to blame for everything, but he couldn't admit it. At first he blamed the doctors and demanded a trial, but there were no medical errors. Then he found another scapegoat, his own newborn daughter. The father was angry with the baby. Meanwhile, Edward had completed his 1st year at military school. He came home for his mother's funeral, and he was the one who had to take care of Lucy. Ron never came near her. He seemed to have forgotten about her existence. Ron just drank, drowning in alcohol and his grief. Edward, who himself was in pain, thought that his stepfather was also going through a difficult time, so he did not ask why. He, not Ron, was changing diapers and making formula to feed Lucy. However, soon Edward realized that the problem was much deeper than he thought. That evening there was a suffocating silence in the apartment. Ron was drinking again, sitting in the kitchen. Edward was frying potatoes for dinner when he heard the baby cry. The young man immediately left the kitchen and went to his room. He dragged the baby's crib there to keep a closer eye on Lucy. However, his stepfather's voice made him stop in his tracks. It sounded scarier than the baby's cries. "I wish that brat was never born," he said hoarsely. "You know, I'm thinking of putting her in an orphanage." "What?" Edward turned around, thinking he had misheard. The man knocked back his shot, sniffed a piece of lemon before tossing it into his mouth. "I can't stand to look at her. Don't want to touch her. What's the point of her being here? Nobody needs her," he said. "I need her." Edward clenched his fists. "Just try to take Lucy away from here." Ron looked at his stepson with reddened, cloudy eyes. "What are you talking about? She killed your mother," he barked, slamming his fist on the table. "You demanded a child from her," he yelled back, "so you're to blame." Ron tried to get up from the table in anger, with the clear intention of teaching his stepson a lesson, but his body failed him, causing him to stumble and fall back onto the chair. Lucy was still crying, calling for her brother, as she knew no other warmth. Edward rushed to his little sister. He took the baby in his arms, seeing that her face was already red from tears. "Hush, little sister," he muttered. "I won't let anyone hurt you." Listening to her brother's heartbeat, Lucy fell asleep again. However, Edward did not return to the kitchen. He locked himself in his room and sat there until morning, not letting the baby out of his sight. He thought a lot. When it's summer and you're a handsome 19-year-old guy, you want to enjoy your youth, go to nightclubs, have fun, and make new acquaintances. However, Edward's future was different. That night he made a difficult decision for himself. He took an academic leave from the military school, intending to take care of his younger sister. He hoped that in a year, when the baby grows up, his stepfather will come to his senses. He must be going through terrible stress from losing his wife right now. He needs time, Edward thought. However, he did not understand why no one gave him that time for grieving. He also lost the closest person. Only Edward was a real son of his mother and did not allow himself to drown in sorrow. Just as Marceline found salvation in her child, Edward found solace in Lucy. Meanwhile, Ron did not get any better. He was constantly dissatisfied with his children. He continued to drink and curse. The man never helped his stepson with his daughter. Ron was away for a long time on duty. Once every 3 months he brought some food, gave his stepson a little money, and accompanied it with comments, "You'd die here without me, huh?" Then he nodded at his daughter. "And what's she screaming about again? Is she retarded or something?" Edward felt sick of being dependent on his stepfather. Soon he realized that things couldn't go on like this. There was no talk of returning to military school. Ron wouldn't pay for a nanny, and Edward didn't have the money, so he dropped the idea of becoming a soldier. Edward started thinking about what he was good at and where he could work without leaving home. The answer, as it turned out, was right in front of him. Once, an old client sent a message to Edward's mother, not knowing that she had died. Edward read the message without much enthusiasm. It turned out that the client offered a good fee for a series of advertising posters. Edward typed a concise and slightly biting response on the keyboard that his mother had died and they, to his deepest regret, would have to find another designer. However, he didn't send it. His fingers froze on the button. He reread the technical task again, then stopped at the fee and swallowed saliva. "Really?" muttered Edward. He glanced at Lucy. She was sitting on the floor sorting toys. Her faded dress bothered Edward. He was tired of washing it. The baby got things dirty quickly, and his stepfather didn't give money to buy new ones. The older brother closed his eyes. He tiredly rubbed his face. He remembered the words Ron yelled at him in the face yesterday, spraying saliva and breathing booze. "Get rid of this retarded girl out of my sight." He pointed at the crying girl with a shaking finger. "I don't want to see her. She killed her mother. She's a monster." Ron raged only because little Lucy fell and hurt herself. Seeing this, the man decided she was underdeveloped. Thinking about all this, Edward erased his response and wrote a new one. "Everything will be done." From that day on, he used every free minute to learn or create. Fortunately, Edward inherited artistic talent from his mother. School teachers always noted this, making him draw posters for competitions and school events. But he'd never paid much attention until now. This time, he took a risk. He took his mother's graphic tablet, started studying programs and the intricacies of design art. When he sent his work to the customer, his heart beat so hard in his chest that it felt like he had already run a marathon. Edward waited for an answer all day. By evening he had already despaired, deciding that they had seen through him, and the works would be sent back and criticised. After all, his mother was a professional, and he was self-taught. And besides, time was short. However, when Edward was feeding his sister, making a spoon airplane and buzzing, he received a response. "Everything is cool. We send it to print. Where should we transfer the money?" Edward let out a loud exhalation and then laughed. Lucy didn't understand what made her brother laugh, but she also started laughing. Edward looked at her dirty face with traces of dinner, picked up his little sister and hugged her. Remembering that the child had just eaten, the boy calmed down, but still hugged the baby to him. "Everything will be fine with us, Lucy," he promised. Edward kept his promise. He took on tasks for designers, worked in any spare time. With each completed project, he became more inspired, constantly developing skills and following trends in the world of graphic design. Of course, there were also unpleasant moments. For example, difficult clients with numerous revisions. Once, someone cheated Edward out of a payment for a job. From that moment on, he implemented a system of prepayment. Although he endured Ron's reproaches, Edward didn't tell his stepfather anything about his new income. Instead, he simply saved money until he could leave his stepfather's home. When it occurred, he went to court to take custody of Lucy. Ron didn't resist, as his daughter was never important to him. But that was only the beginning of the story for the brother and sister. When Lucy was 2.5 years old, she already spoke well. She called Edward either brother or daddy, as she didn't know another father. She also became very curious and asked millions of questions. One evening, as Edward was putting his little sister to bed, he told her a fairy tale. He couldn't remember the plot of Cinderella or Puss in Boots, so he made up beautiful stories on the spot about princesses, knights, dragons and other fairy creatures. "What was the elf like?" Lucy asked him in the middle of the story. Edward stumbled. "With pointy ears and white hair." "Pointy? What does that mean?" "If you fall asleep, I'll draw it in the morning," Edward promised, yawning. Lucy tried to fall asleep. She really wanted to see the elf, and Edward had to keep his promise. He drew a beautiful elf when Lucy sat on his lap, then a dragon, and then a princess in a ball gown. When Lucy became afraid of the dark, Edward invented a tale about fairies who lived on little stars and came to sleeping girls in their dreams. Lucy also asked him to draw the fairies. "They know what I look like, but I don't know what they look like," the child exclaimed. Edward began drawing illustrations for his own fairy tales to delight his sister. This is how books authored by Edward appeared in their library. One of his friends saw the books and suggested that Edward publish them online. "What if someone buys them?" he shrugged. "The books are cool." Edward shrugged but didn't dismiss the idea. What he didn't expect was the insane popularity of his work. So, Edward went from being an advertising designer to a children's book author. The stories were touching and kind because he told them to his beloved sister. Later, fame descended upon the brother and sister. People loved the story of a young man who cared for his younger sister and wrote her fairy tales. Edward was embarrassed by the attention, but it led to something wonderful. One day, a young woman came to their house. Blushing, she asked Edward for an interview for the newspaper. Her name was Maggie. She was a student on an internship. She was told to take an interview of anyone worthy of admiration. She chose Edward, as she was subscribed to his social media account and even bought his books. She asked him to sign them. "Do you have brothers or sisters?" Edward asked. "No," the girl blushed and then looked at him slyly. "Maybe I'm also afraid to sleep alone in the dark. Do you have any advice for adult girls?" Later, Maggie confessed that she was embarrassed by her silly flirting. She had no experience of communicating with men, and Edward really wanted to impress her, so she blurted out something she read in a woman's magazine. However, it was precisely the fact that Megan blushed to the roots of her hair and flirted with Edward that made him laugh. 2 years later, Maggie became his fiancée, and later his wife. Meanwhile, Lucy grew up as a happy child who knew no sorrow. Although she didn't have parents, her brother replaced them all. He sacrificed a lot just to make her smile. A child's smile is worth all the treasure of this world. At least that's what Edward thought. And fate rewarded him in the end. At the bus stop, a peculiar passenger boarded the dusty, dilapidated bus that travelled along provincial roads. His presence was unusual, especially considering the stop was located in a deserted wilderness. The surrounding villages were dying out, as the youth flocked to bigger cities for the opportunity to live more comfortably, while the elderly simply passed away due to old age. The old man, approximately 75 years old, looked like a character from old folk tales. He had long, well-groomed grey hair, and his beard looked in all directions, resembling the crown of an oak tree, to which the old man somewhat resembled with his stockiness. His clothing was simple, not rags, but not a luxurious suit either. In some places, patches were visible. The clothes were old but functional. He held on to a homemade walking stick. In general, he looked like a prophet, a pilgrim, or even a beggar. However, the respectable old man paid no attention to the curious glances of the passengers. He stood firmly on his feet, and his whole posture was not that of a bent old man who barely dragged his bones, but rather that of an aging warrior whose remnants of strength were still with him. "Excuse me, how much further until the district city?" the old man calmly asked the driver. "I'm going to the Le Bourdieu restaurant. Is there still one?" "Of course there is. What brings you there? Don't get me wrong, but you don't seem like a regular at such establishments." "I decided to visit distant relatives, find out how they're doing, and treat myself to some delicious food." The old man smoothed his beard and hid a grin under it. "Well, I have good news for you. Our bus station is not far from that restaurant. In a couple of hours we will get there," answered the driver. "Thank you." The elderly man headed to a free seat, and people fell silent at the sight of him, looking at him respectfully. By evening, the bus had arrived at its final destination, and the friendly driver even escorted the old man to the restaurant. After bidding farewell and thanking him, the old man headed towards the entrance. Cuthbert remembered his hometown differently, although his hometown welcomed him with open arms, but it was unrecognizable. The old man remembered it as a modest town, but now it was vulgar, flashy, and covered its natural beauty with a lot of makeup, making it unrecognizable. He felt himself like a pilgrim who went to distant lands, taking a handful of his homelands in his soul, and after decades of wandering, he returned home. Neither he nor his home recognized each other. To be honest, nobody was waiting for the elderly man at the restaurant, but it didn't bother him. His journey led him to the right address, and that was important. The parking lot in front of the restaurant was filled with expensive cars, and the noise of the celebration could be heard through the open doors. It was clear that the wedding was in full swing. A well-groomed staff member stood at the entrance. The young man was polished and shaved to add shine to the already rich event. The elderly man approached him and asked, "Hello, could you tell me where the bride and groom are?" The staff member frowned, annoyed by silly requests from drunken guests or original jokers all evening. He doubted that someone unfamiliar would come to the wedding, so he waved his hands towards the banquet hall. "They're all in there. I think you'll recognize the bride of the groom yourself. Of course, they're the most beautiful, although the bridesmaid is beautiful too." The elderly man didn't listen to his speculation more and headed towards the banquet hall. The bride and groom were seated at the head of the table. The young woman was dressed in a splendid wedding dress. The groom looked cheerful. He was dressed in a classic suit, which he wore with a feigned lightness. He felt the desire to control all the festivities, instead of indulging in the general merriment. He was good-looking, so no one could be surprised by the choice of the bride. Cuthbert headed to the newlyweds, but nobody paid him any attention. Everyone was dancing, singing, and having fun. Toasts were being made for the health and happiness of the newlyweds, and for many children to come. The old man approached the young couple unnoticed and greeted them. "Cheers to the newlyweds." The bride greeted him with a joyful smile. Closer, it was obvious that she was already quite tired from her main day in her life, and the groom was just annoyed. They would have gladly gone to their place by now, but tradition is tradition. "Hello, what brings you to us?" the bride asked politely. "Guess, beauty. Or let's ask the groom, he's the head of the family. Fate brought me from afar, and that's why I predict the fate of others. What are they afraid to know?" "You're Matthew, aren't you?" the old man asked. The groom tensed up and asked demandingly, "Who are you?" "Does it matter who this poor old man is? What matters is who is still alive. I came here by destiny. I see a young man whose conscience is bothering him. Poor guy, but it's not your bride." At that moment the bride shuddered, tears glistening in the corners of her eyes. Matthew paid no attention to her and stared at the old man. He was furious. If gaze could kill, the old man would have turned to ash a long time ago. The unexpected guest's words were like a match, and accumulated exhaustion and irritation found an outlet. The groom angrily threw a question at the old man. "Why the hell did you come to my wedding and decide to ruin everyone's mood? Shall I throw you out, or will you go in a known direction yourself?" The old man remained calm and continued, "You know, boy, you don't have to scare me. I've been scared many times in my life, but I'm still walking on this earth, and death hasn't claimed me yet. So, don't worry about me, but you should be afraid for yourself. For your actions, you're facing jail time. You may not believe it, get angry, or whatever, but it will happen." The groom felt like he had been slapped across the face. He turned pale and blinked rapidly. All his fighting spirit crumbled like a house of cards. In his eyes there was a silent question. "How do you know this?" Meanwhile, the uninvited guest continued to fog. "Have you been hunting recently?" "A long time ago," the groom replied in a low voice. "And in vain. There are too many beasts in the woods now, although I've heard that they're making cartridges now, only to scare the animals with noise, not to kill them. How do you feel about that?" "Oh, everything is fine with my bullets," replied Matthew, and felt hatred towards the stranger beggar he had met just a few minutes ago. Even though the old man didn't directly accuse him, he clearly knew something. Laurel, the bride, saw only wisdom in the old man. He touched the strings of her soul that she had preferred to hide for the past year and a half. Now the old man seemed to pass on a message from her past world, greetings from her deceased lover. He had been gone for a year and a half, but she still couldn't forget him. She agreed to the marriage with Matthew only to forget and move on, and now the old man mentioned it in passing. After all, it was during the hunt that the incident happened. "It's a good thing you have real bullets. There's been all sorts of precedents. But I see that you're a tough guy, who can even go after a bear," the old man continued. Matthew couldn't take it anymore. He got up, took the stranger by the elbow, roughly led him out of the restaurant to the stunned gaze of the guests, and the incident was forgotten after a minute. Meanwhile, the bride used a back door and caught up with the old man. She handed him a small bundle of treats, quickly put together in the restaurant kitchen. "I'm so sorry. Forgive Matthew. He's just nervous. He's just so emotional. It's not every day that a man gets married. That's why he's so angry. But I listened to you carefully, and you said strange words. Nothing really, but somehow it's scary and creepy. Do you know something about that day?" "My name is Cuthbert. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. You're looking for answers that I can give you, but I won't. If you want to find them, remember where you left your love, and look for it in the closed village not far away. Answers are waiting for you there. And now, I'm leaving. A long road awaits me, and you have a choice, to look for the truth or to live as you've been living." The old man turned and limped towards the bus stop. The bride was called, but she didn't hear anything and continued to stand still. Memories consumed her. It all happened a year and a half ago. Her beloved Paul and Matthew went hunting on that fateful day. In addition to their business and friendship, they had a shared passion for hunting. Nothing foretold the trouble. As usual, the friends took their rifles and went to find prey. But they became the prey themselves. When Matthew arrived home that evening, he told everything. A bear attacked them. The animal probably woke up from hibernation earlier than usual, so it was aggressive. Paul was less lucky. His rifle broke. Matthew shot at the bear and ran away when he saw that his friend was already dead. They didn't even find his body later. For 6 months, Laurel suffered and couldn't find her place. She blamed and cursed everyone and everything. After a while, Matthew started making timid attempts to become her boyfriend, but the girl kept the memory of her beloved for a year before finally responding to Matthew's feelings. She didn't burn with great love for him, but he was a handsome young man. She was sure he would always stand by her because he adored her and felt guilty of the death of his friend. Matthew often said he was guilty before her for not protecting Paul, and he said it sincerely. She believed and forgave him long ago. After the wedding and a short honeymoon, when the newlyweds finally had their fill of each other and remembered that they had other matters besides love, Matthew began to frequently disappear at work. Meanwhile, Laurel took over the arrangement of their family nest and completely immersed herself in household chores. It was unusual for her to realize herself as a wife to meet her husband from work. The absence of great, pure love weighed on her. She was expecting for something else from her marriage. Meanwhile, Laurel increasingly remembered the elder. He even appeared in her dreams and stared at her with reproach and silence. One day, Laurel called her husband, who was at work. "Yes, Laurel," came the slightly irritated voice from the other end of the phone. Apparently Matthew was busy and she was distracting him. Perhaps it was precisely this irritability that helped Laurel finally pull herself together and carry out her plans. "Darling, sorry to distract you. I was talking to Rachel and she invited me to go hiking in the woods overnight. She has a house there that was her grandfather's, a gamekeeper. We'll stay there. Are you okay with that?" Laurel made up a pleasant, harmless story for her husband. In response, Matthew sighed heavily. "Of course, I don't mind. Especially, I'll be busy with our business." "Thanks, Kitty. Love you," laughed Laurel. "Have a good trip. Don't forget to leave some food. Kitty won't eat Whiskers with beer." "Well, I've dealt with the main thing," Laurel thought to herself. First, Laurel stopped at a gas station and filled all available containers with fuel. She didn't know how long she would be looking for the village, so she had to prepare. The next point of her journey was a trip to the store for groceries. While she wandered around the supermarket, she did not lose the joyful excitement of participating in a small adventure. This is how a mischievous girl feels, running away from home for the first time through a window to a disco. The journey met her with deserted, dusty roads, potholes, and frequent stops. Little by little, this shook the childish delight out of the woman, leaving only determination. If the old man could do it, so could she, for sure. Several hours of tension that any driver experiences behind the wheel did not prevent Laurel from admiring the surroundings. Forests alternated with cultivated fields, and fields gave way to hills, all of which fascinated, bloomed and smelled. The woman stopped more than once just to pick a flower and inhale its scent. Sometimes she came across wild animals, mostly deer or hares. She looked at this diverse world with wide open eyes. She arrived at the bus stop in the evening. While she was figuring out her route, Laurel realized that it was too late to go anywhere, and she would have to spend the night here until morning. She drove a short distance away and turned off the car. After a quick snack of galettes and mineral water, she unfolded the driver's seat and tried to sleep. The cacophony of the night forest was so unusual for a city dweller that the woman couldn't close her eyes for a long time, and only fatigue and stress from the day's experiences led her to sleep closer to midnight. As Laurel stretched her stiff body in the morning, she scolded herself for her foolish adventure. But her heart skipped a beat when she remembered Paul. If the old man could unveil the secret, she would find peace and be able to move on. That's what Laurel thought as she approached the first settlement. She met an old woman with a bucket of water who was going about her business and greeted her. "Good morning," the woman responded and looked at Laurel skeptically. It was clear that strangers were not welcome here. "Where are you from and what do you need?" "I'm looking for a closed village where an elder with a beard lives." The elderly woman looked at Laurel strangely and hurried away. "I don't know any lost villages and any elders." Surprised by the woman's strange reaction, Laurel drove on. But the same thing happened in the next village, and only in the third one did a middle-aged forester point to a half-abandoned dirt forest path whose entrance was marked by a wooden post. "Just be careful. There are all kinds of rumors about that village. We don't have much contact with them, and they don't seek our friendship out either. We live like this, not bothering each other. I don't know what you need them for, but if you feel something's wrong, come straight back here," said the forester. "Thank you, I'll keep that in mind." Laurel smiled, said goodbye to the forester and drove on. The branches whipped against the side windows and sometimes tried to break the windshield. The grass almost covered the car's headlights. She drove slowly because of this, afraid of missing a turn or just breaking the car. An hour of unhurried driving brought her to a rather strange place. The settlement was located on a huge artificial clearing that most likely arose when trees were cut down for austere log cabins. The dwellings were rough. The only modern touch was the glass windows. Everything else was purely wooden. Despite the early hour, the village was alive. Children ran around here and there, men were busy with crafts, and women only occasionally appeared on the street. The appearance of a car interested all the settlement's residents without exception. The men stopped working and went out to meet the uninvited guests. Laurel got out of the car. She was scared, but determined to finish what she started. If this was some kind of sect, she seemed unlikely to escape. "Good day, young lady. What brings you here? And why have you disturbed our peace?" said the bearded, burly, middle-aged man, who looked more like a bear than a human. Apparently, he was the local leader. "Hello, I was invited," answered Laurel, and the villagers exchanged glances. "Invited by whom?" "We have renounced the world and live alone with nature. We don't invite strangers here. People come here by the call of their heart. So why did you come?" the leader said. "You could say it was by the call of my heart. An elder invited me here. His name is Cuthbert, and he promised to tell me the secret of my fiancé's death." Suddenly, an old man with the familiar staff emerged from the crowd. "So, you finally decided to get to the truth. Or did your conscience torment you?" "Why should my conscience torment me?" asked the woman, surprised. "Come with me." The old man gestured with his staff, leading the girl towards his cabin. The villagers parted, letting the guest through, then silently went about their business. So, after a few minutes, only a car reminded of the unusual place for this event. The old man's cabin looked like a fairy tale scary dungeon, but Laurel soon got used to the darkness. Cuthbert led her to the brightest room in the dwelling. It was spacious, with birdsong coming through the open windows. A man lay on a large bed closer to the fireplace. He was emaciated and looked tortured, but his eyes were thoughtful. Next to the bed was a small stool, which apparently served as a bedside table. On it lay a book, a wooden, unfinished child's toy, and a knife with which the toy was carved. "Well, have you recognized him?" asked Cuthbert. "No. Who is he?" whispered Laurel, and the man lying on the bed looked at her unfriendly, as if she had offended him. "You see, Paul, I've told you, that woman's love is short. She buried you long ago, and your appearance began to fade from her memory," the elder gloated. "Don't rush, Cuthbert, and let her come to her senses." The lying man's voice was somewhat hoarse, but familiar to Laurel. But how could it be possible? "Paul? Is that you?" exclaimed the woman, losing consciousness. She came to when the old man splashed icy water on her face. Oh, those gentle city girls. They faint at the slightest stress. Cuthbert grumbled as he sat Laurel down on a chair. "Can you guys manage without me?" the old man asked, more Laurel than Paul. She nodded. "So, we've met. Have you really forgotten me?" asked the lying man, and stared at Laurel. "No, Paul, but a lot of water has flowed under the bridge. I thought you were dead. After all, Matthew said that the bear tore you to pieces then." Laurel's eyes filled with tears. She understood that she had betrayed her man. "Well, let me tell you the truth, and then we'll decide what to do next." During the hunt, Paul and Matthew encountered a bear that attacked them. They tried to escape, but the beast ran straight towards Paul. Hunter's instinct told him to shoot straight at the bear's face, but at the last moment, instead of a shot, there was a click, and Paul realized this was the end. He tried to dodge and move to the side, but the bear's paw reached him and pushed him with great force against a strong pine tree. Since then, he couldn't feel his legs. Paul lost consciousness and then briefly came to from the sound of a gunshot. His mind told him that it was Matthew trying to shoot the bear. The bear stooped over its prey, but the shot in its back only enraged it, and the beast turned towards its attacker. But Matthew was already running as fast as he could to the car, thinking that it was better for Paul to die than for him. Taking advantage of the fact that the bear had left, Paul crawled, not knowing where he was going, how long he crawled, when he lost unconsciousness, what he ate. All these events were erased from the young man's memory. All he remembered was the helplessness of not feeling his legs. When Cuthbert found him in the woods, Paul mistook him for a prophet because he was by then running a fever. Fortunately for the rescued man, the old man had a feeling that day and went to pick up mushrooms. Cuthbert was quite strong, so he was able to drag Paul to the settlement. For a month, the old man had been busy pulling the hapless hunter out of the edge of the afterlife. He was delirious for over a week. He would call his beloved, curse his friend who had abandoned him, and swear at the bear. Then Paul gradually regained consciousness, but still didn't understand where he was and thought he had died. Gradually, Cuthbert was able to bring the young man back to life, healing everything except his spine. Since then, Paul had been bedridden. The life of the old man was no less interesting and tragic. Cuthbert was a well-known surgeon until he was in a car accident. It wasn't his fault, but his son and wife died. So, he persistently blamed himself for a long time. Work would have helped him forget, but his vision began to deteriorate, and a constant tremor permanently closed off his professional activity. Seeing no way out for himself, the strong-willed doctor did not drink or end his life. Instead, he decided to become a hermit. He decided for himself that he had helped people enough, and that the familiar places only brought back painful memories of his dead wife and son. He got on the first bus that came along. Then he just walked where the eyes can see, and then bumped into the closed road. It can be safely said that fate itself brought him there. He liked their ideas, and one day he felt that the vague, unpolished, but still a gift that manifested itself in random visions. And it was in this place, alone with himself and nature, that he found peace, releasing his deceased wife and son into a world where they were better off. Once, Cuthbert had a vision in the middle of the night about Paul. The old man woke him up and said, "Listen carefully. I'll tell you once and forget about it tomorrow. You decide what you want. Are you ready? Your friend is to blame for your misfortune and weakness, but not because he abandoned you in the woods. He set it up long ago. He found a den, and then he gave you bad bullets. Seeing you with a bear, his conscience aroused, and he made a shot. And I had a vision that his wedding was coming soon. If you correctly described to me your girlfriend, he is going to marry her. It's not strange because it's been a year and a half. Now think about it and give me an answer in the morning about what you have decided." In the morning, Paul's decision was ready, and Cuthbert went to the wedding. The whole time that Laurel was listening to his story, she didn't stop crying and endlessly repeating the same thing. "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." "Calm down. I had enough time to forgive you. But why him? Why Matthew?" Paul asked. "Then it's my turn to tell the story. I couldn't eat, drink or sleep for 6 months, knowing that I lost you. During that time, Matthew supported me in every way possible. He had feelings for me before, and now I was single again. But I wasn't in the mood for a relationship. I was grieving for you. Half a year later, another disaster struck me. My father fell seriously ill, and there was not enough money for treatment. That's when Matthew went all in. He suggested combining efforts and creating a family. He said, "If you don't love me, at least let me love you." And we have more in common than it seems. Not only the memory of Paul. What was left for me? I love my father, and that was my chance. I accepted his proposal. So, the rich Matthew saved my father. Saved selflessly, of course, Paul sneered. After all, he took over my part of the business, and he framed me for the bear's amusement. Good saviour. No way. He's a scoundrel. The girl started apologizing again for everything and cried. The flow of lamentation was interrupted by Cuthbert. "You know, I've seen a lot in my life. Breakups, betrayals, and deaths on the operating table. I often argued with death, playing fool with her and ruining her bloody harvest, pulling patients out of clinical death. But now I've done everything I can for you. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. You gave me a second life. You gave me my beloved back," said Laurel. "But what now? Should I run to the police and file a complaint against Matthew? And what will I say there?" "You're thinking straight. Nobody will believe you. They'll laugh at you even more." Paul expressed his opinion and then added, "Do you want to be with me? A bedridden invalid? What difference does it make to me whether you're a bedridden or not? You're alive and I love you. That's what matters." "I've been thinking a little." The old man began speaking in riddles. "I said that I did everything I could for both of you, and that's really true, but for you, Paul, I can do something else. They say that a debt is beautiful when it's paid. I have one acquaintance who owes me. He is a neurosurgeon. I think if you send him a message from me, he'll put you back on your feet. He's a knowledgeable specialist, better than the ones I knew. You see how it all works out perfectly. I must go into town to arrange everything," began to hurry the woman. "Wait, let me admire you a little," asked Paul, and Laurel moved closer to him, and they kissed. "Laurel, let's keep the fact that I'm alive a secret for now. Let's not give Matthew a chance to harm us. You go to the city and find out about a doctor. I'll wait for you here." "Okay, my love. It will be difficult to get out unnoticed again, but I'll manage." They said their goodbyes and the girl left the village. She drove home feeling inspired, but all the way home she felt nauseous. Laurel attributed it to motion sickness from the long car ride, but when she got home, the nausea didn't go away. Remembering that this malaise had been haunting her for weeks, Laurel suddenly felt a chill on her back. She went to the bathroom, took a test, and saw 2 stripes. It was a sudden blow to her love for Paul. The girl was distraught. On one hand, there was her beloved Paul, a disabled man who had lost everything and might not be able to return to the city. On the other hand, there was Matthew, who adored, cherished, and provided for her. And she was expecting his baby. Her rational mind was leaning towards staying with Matthew. Love doesn't feed a baby, and happiness is a fickle thing. Nevertheless, now Laurel had lost her restful sleep. A week later, one warm evening, Matthew stopped at the store to buy something delicious for dinner. He remembered that his wife liked eclairs and decided to make her a little surprise, as she hadn't been herself lately. In line, he ran into Rachel, Laurel's friend. "Oh, hi, Rachel. So how was the trip? Did you like it?" "Hi. What trip are you talking about?" She was surprised. "Well, your grandfather's cabin, where you used to live in childhood." "What are you talking about? I don't have any grandfather's cabin. I haven't been out of the city in ages." Matthew left all the goods at the checkout and rushed out of the store. "Oops," Rachel could only squeak, realizing how she had set up her friend. She tried to call Laurel, but she had been unreachable. In their short married life, Laurel had learned to read her husband's emotions, and if he came home in a bad mood, she immediately sensed Matthew's state. Now he stormed into the house like a whirlwind, and, looking at him, everyone could think that he was going to explode at any minute. "What's wrong with you, dear?" asked Laurel, trying to soothe him, but he looked at her with wolfish eyes and went to the kitchen to brew himself some coffee. "Sit down, I'll make it. Do you want something to eat?" asked Laurel, showing her care. "You know, Laurel, I'd prefer to hear an interesting story from you first." "What kind of story?" His wife was nervous. She clearly didn't like the situation, which was getting more and more tense. "Well, we're about to find out. I met Rachel at the store, and you know what? I found out from her that she didn't have any grandfather's forest house. Unbelievable, right?" "Yeah." Laurel lowered her eyes, realizing that something irreparable was about to happen. "I'll explain everything to you honestly right now. You've already explained everything when you lied to me. Wasn't I enough for you in our marriage? I cured your father. You don't need to work. What else do you need in this life?" shouted Matthew with hatred. His anger was righteous, and it was hard to extinguish that flame. Laurel began, but a spasm of nervousness twisted her. You're a snake that I kept warm on my chest. You're a cheater." Enraged, Matthew grabbed his wife by the hair and delivered a strong slap. The world before the woman wobbled. It was like 1,000 stars exploded in her head, and her eyes went dark. The pain in her stomach became unbearable, and Laurel lost consciousness. "Miscarriage," the gynecologist said matter-of-factly. He had to say this very often, and he was already used to it and became callous. But for his patients, it was a huge personal tragedy. No, he wasn't a bad or cynical doctor. He was just tired of endless tragedies. Laurel lay there not wanting anything, not even to move. They put IVs in her. Her condition was stable, but she lost a lot of blood, and she lost her baby. And in her despair, the woman didn't even blame Matthew for his actions. It was justified by her lie. She scolded herself for forgetting to ask Rachel to cover for her and to lie to her husband. However, Rachel also reproached herself for her loose tongue and felt guilty. She visited her friend every day, and one day Laurel told her secret. "So are you saying that Paul is alive?" Rachel didn't even try to hide her surprise. "I wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't seen him with my own eyes." "And what are you going to do now?" "What can I do? Look, I'm lying here full of injections. What can I do now?" "Listen, you can't, but I can. You haven't told your husband anything yet, right?" "No, but you don't know where to drive, do you?" "Laurel, I want to fix my mistake. Take your time and tell me in detail. I'll talk to Paul and we'll figure out what to do. Besides, I always liked Paul more than Matthew. By the way, is your husband repentant, or are you getting a divorce and going back to your maiden name?" Laurel smiled sadly. "I don't know what's on his mind. He's sending me repentance SMS messages and paying for treatment, but I'm not ready to see him in person yet. I don't know if I even want to see him. I love Paul, and I was going to stay with Matthew because of the child, but now there is no child." Saying this, Laurel turned to the window and cried. Rachel understood that it was best to leave her friend alone now, and she quietly left. Cuthbert was particularly tired today. Berry and mushroom picking had started to take more energy than before. He was pleased that the children were increasingly joining him. It was interesting for him to teach them and to tell the younger generation about life in the stone jungles, which they had never seen before. The children perceived his descriptions of cities in the same way that Cuthbert himself perceived tales of wizards and fairies. Paul was busy with his usual activity, making toys. This time he was making a set of wooden soldiers, all of which looked similar. It was worth noting that he had become a master of his craft. "Well done, beautiful carving. They look just like real ones. Each boy will get a warrior, right?" Cuthbert praised Paul. "Yes, 7 are ready, 2 more to go. Then I'll ask Brady for more blanks. You know, I'm inspired to be useful. I'm carving trinkets, keeping busy, and sometimes I forget that my legs don't work. I like seeing the children's eyes when they receive gifts. I wonder if I'll ever have my own child, a son or a daughter. Oh, dreams." "Cheer up, Paul. Now it's up to Laurel. By the way, I haven't heard from her in a long time, and I have a bad feeling about something," said the old man. He was silent for a minute, thinking about something, and then finally made his decision. "I'll go to the city again." "For me?" asked stunned Paul. "For you, for Laurel, and for myself. I haven't been feeling very well lately. Maybe there won't be any more opportunities to see my hometown." The old man replied and began to gather his things. 20 minutes later, he was walking along the forest path. When the old man reached the edge of the thicket where a wooden post stood, he saw a car and a woman next to it. "Daughter, where are you going?" the old man asked sympathetically. "Probably to you. Are you Cuthbert?" The old man nodded and the woman introduced herself. "I'm Rachel, Laurel's friend. Get into the car, please. Let's go to Laurel. She couldn't come herself. It's hard for her without you. She needs advice." "What happened to her?" worried Cuthbert. Rachel explained. "She was pregnant. Her husband became very jealous when he found out about her trip here and hit her. She lost the baby, and she's in the ICU now. Her condition is stable but serious." "Ooh, she really got into trouble," said the old man, and thoughtfully stroked his beard. They arrived at the hospital closer to the evening. Rachel saw Matthew's car parked near the entrance and warned the old man about that. "Don't worry, we'll take the risk," said the old man, calmly placing his hand on Rachel's. "Well, if we're taking the risk, hold this. Can you use it?" The woman handed him a dictaphone. "I'm not that ancient, dear. It's even offensive. Of course I know how to use it." Cuthbert pretended to be offended. "Don't be offended. It's all because of your beard." Rachel smiled. "Well, let's go." The old man smiled in response and got out of the car. Matthew was not in the hall. The old man headed for the department, but someone called out to him. "Stop! No visitors allowed. I'll call security right now." "Are you talking to me, dear? I've been working in this hospital for 20 years. Then take this." The former surgeon handed the woman his passport and asked to call the head of the department. 15 minutes later, Cuthbert entered the ward. Laurel wasn't sleeping. He looked at the pale, emaciated woman and said hello. "Oh, Cuthbert, how did you get here? Did Rachel reach you?" The surprised patient bombarded the old man with questions. "Yes, everything's fine. Now listen to me. Here's a dictaphone. I'll put it in your hand and you turn it on when your husband comes in and pretend to be sleeping. I asked my ex-colleagues to delay him for a couple of minutes, and they're running out now. Don't show any signs that you're conscious so that nothing happens. Do you understand?" Laurel nodded in agreement, and the old man handed her the recorder. When hurried steps were heard in the hallway, she pressed the button and tried to breathe as evenly as possible. Matthew rushed into the ward. He had been tormented by guilt since he hit his wife. He wanted to explain himself, beg for forgiveness, even kneel at any cost to fix what he had done. He sincerely loved her and was afraid of losing her, and now wanted to find peace through forgiveness. But seeing Cuthbert, Matthew got furious right away. Everything started with that damn old man. "What the hell are you doing here?" The man started to shout, but Cuthbert put a finger to his lips and gestured towards the sleeping woman. That was enough to calm down Matthew's spreading rage. "She's my wife. Who let you in? Get out of here," hissed Matthew. "If she's your wife, does that mean you have the right to beat her? You're walking on thin ice." "I feel bad, even without you moralizing. Are you her relative? If not, leave us alone, and we'll figure it out on our own." "Well, how did you think this would end? You can't build happiness on someone else's misery. Have you heard that before?" "I don't live on someone else's misery." "Oh, really? And what about the unfortunate Hunt?" "What do you want?" tiredly asked Matthew. "The truth, from beginning to end. Notice, I'm not asking you to confess. Just tell me how you killed Paul." "I didn't kill him. It was the bear," protested Matthew. "I asked for the truth." "The bear doesn't attack humans at this time. It sleeps soundly if not disturbed," the old man reasonably noted. "Old man, why do you want to know all this if you already know everything?" "I offered you my conditions. Tell me the truth and I'll leave you alone. Is that a deal?" "Fine, Grandpa. You've got it. Just make sure after my story I don't see you anymore. Agreed?" "Okay. Since my beauty is asleep, we have plenty of time. I'll start from the beginning. Paul and I have been inseparable since childhood. We were friends, grew up, conquered the peaks. One trouble. We fell in love with the same girl. But Laurel chose Paul. I endured the beginning of their relationship. How they ran around like happy puppies. Yes, damn it, I was consumed with envy. The most natural envy. It tormented me then as much as my conscience does now. But I would do it again if I had the choice, because I love her." "And how did you come up with the plan with the bear?" Cuthbert asked a leading question. "Well, Paul and I had a shared hobby and a shared business. After a hard work week, we like to relax by shooting some animals to feel free, you know? Anyway, We often hunted in those parts. There were no dens there before, but here I noticed one. At first I thought I'd try to lure the beast out and shoot it together, but then I decided not to touch it for now, and I didn't say anything to Paul. So, you were waiting for the right moment? No, I just wasn't ready then, but I made up my mind when Laurel and Paul announced their upcoming wedding. A switch flipped in my head. I thought everything can be arranged as an accident, which worked out perfectly, as you know. I even got a batch of 40 cartridges from the double-barreled shotgun, which I handed to my friend. Not that I thought Paul had a chance against the bear, but business teaches us to be cautious. Okay, so how did you wake up the bear? Firecrackers. Just a simple firecracker that woke up the bear from his sleep. It was very offended and started looking for someone to punish for the offence. I went in the opposite direction as a precaution, but Paul went straight to his death. It's a pity for the bear. He probably died too. Why did you shoot the bear? What was the point if everything was planned out nicely? Oh, you know about that too. You really do have a gift, apparently. Yes, I understood that you look at me and think I am a real scumbag, that I set up my friend, killed him and took his fiancée for myself. But I am also human. Honestly, in the last moment, when the beast threw Paul against the tree with its paw, all the years of our friendship flashed before my eyes. All the fights we had when we were fighting against a whole horde together. Our first hesitant dates and the heartbreak we went through. In short, it was a surge of emotion to save him, but I couldn't. The bear quickly chased after me, but I managed to get to the car and drive away. I got drunk that day. I thought I'd blow my brains out. It would be fair to Paul, but I held back. So, did you start to reap the rewards of your crime after that? The next day I gave Laurel the bad news, and when she was crying on my chest and I was consoling her as best I could, the thought of suicide evaporated from my mind. I believed that a new life had come for me, with a clean sheet. When I started dating this wonderful woman, I was over the moon, and only your appearance put a stop to my happiness. So, I am overjoyed that we're saying goodbye now, as we agreed. Now, leave me alone with my girl. Okay, the old man said, extending his hand for a handshake. Meanwhile, his free hand took the dictaphone from Laurel so Matthew wouldn't notice the change. That same evening, Matthew was arrested on suspicion of murder. During the interrogation, Paul, in a wheelchair, drove into the room and looked piercingly at his failed murderer. Matthew burst into tears. Paul took over the business, much to the surprise of his employees. Matthew handed his share to him. Cuthbert initially wanted to leave and live in solitude, but the young couple owed him everything and asked him to stay and live with them. Though it was too late for him to return to his profession as a surgeon, he found a new hobby that he enjoyed. He began studying psychology, at first for himself and then to help others. He determined what a person needed and provided it. Those who truly needed a prediction received it, while those who simply sought advice from a wise man received it from Cuthbert too. Others just needed someone to talk to, and the old man listened carefully without rushing. His life had taken on a new meaning, as he gave people the will to live and fight. Occasionally, the family would visit a secluded village. For city dwellers, it was a unique place for the soul. They helped by bringing medicines that the settlers themselves could not obtain. One morning, Laurel didn't feel well. It's been like that when I was pregnant for the first time. I have to get a test right away. I will go to the pharmacy for the test, dear. Let me just drink my coffee. Cuthbert was sitting across from them, drinking tea. Watching Laurel's tossing and turning, it was as if he knew the answer in advance that the test would be positive, and he chuckled quietly into his beard. The phone vibrated in the bag once again, and it was Barbara calling. She asked Noelle to drive to the gas station and pick up a puppy that someone had thrown away. Helping animals in need was a regular thing for Noelle. She had been volunteering for a year, providing assistance to animal protection organisations and regularly going to the shelter with food, medicine or money. As a veterinarian, she examined and treated her wards without delay. Sometimes, like today, she was asked to pick up and bring an animal that had been in trouble. "Noelle, honey, hurry up," Barbara's voice sounded on the phone. "Otherwise he'll create even more trouble. They're chasing him with a stick, but he runs away and comes back. Some bad man threw the little one out of the car right at the gas station." Noelle realised that she would find it difficult to catch the puppy on her own. The scared animal usually didn't willingly go into the hands, but there was no way out. She caught a taxi and rushed to the gas station. The scene that greeted her was both comical and tragic. A mongrel puppy, about 5 to 6 months old, was running around the station's territory. His long, thin legs flashed in the air, and a gas station attendant, armed with a broom, ran after him, cursing. "Stop scaring him," Noelle shouted. "You'll only worsen it. He's going to get hit by a car." "Let him get hit. I'm sick of chasing him," the fierce attendant gasped. But an accident could happen. Noelle tried to reason with him. The man spat loudly, reloaded his terrible curse into his verbal gun, and sat aside to rest. "Go get him yourself if you're so smart." The puppy hid behind bushes nearby and also seemed to have decided to gather strength. No matter how hard Noelle tried to lure him out, she couldn't handle it alone. Meanwhile, an old motorcycle pulled up at the gas station. A guy was driving it, and the girl decided to ask him for help. The guy didn't refuse. He rolled the motorcycles aside, and the two of them went to catch the disturber of public peace. Finally, the big-eared bandit was caught and placed in a carrier. It was difficult for him to fit in, and it wasn't worth keeping him there for long. Timothy, as the guy was called, offered to take Noelle and her catch wherever she needed to go. That day, one more zoo volunteer joined the team because since then, Timothy often came to the shelter on his old motorcycle. He helped feed the dogs and cats, cleaned the cages, and played with them. So he became friends with Noelle and soon became her boyfriend. Timothy named the puppy Bandit, and after all the necessary examinations and vaccinations, he moved to live with the guy at home. When Noelle came to visit, the puppy's excitement knew no bounds. The girl quickly became friends with Timothy's mother, Mrs. Oliphant, who had raised her son alone. They lived simply without much wealth. The only riches Timothy had was his familiar to Noelle motorcycle, inherited by his grandfather. Now he also had Bandit, their shared treasure and talisman. Mrs. Oliphant was a very kind woman who immediately treated Noelle as her own daughter. Being near the sweet, caring woman made Noelle feel warm and cosy, which was unusual for her since she grew up in entirely different, special conditions. Timothy was upset that Noelle didn't want to introduce him to her close ones, and she didn't want to explain the reason for a long time. And when Timothy made Noelle a proposal, he put her in a situation where she just had to introduce him to her family. Finally, she revealed the truth she had been hiding from her acquaintances and him for a long time. Her parents were very famous and wealthy people. Noelle lived separately from her parents in a small apartment. She dressed ordinary. She didn't engage in cool entertainment, nightclubs, or a burning life. She studied at a veterinary college, and none of her classmates and volunteer friends even suspected who her father was. When Noelle turned 18, she received the right to dispose of a modest inheritance from her grandfather. She received a small but neat apartment in a residential area, and a modest income from a deposit in her name. Thanking her grandfather mentally for such timely support, she dropped out of a prestigious university and went to study as a veterinarian. She wanted to gain practical skills and engage in her favourite business. Noelle was happy. She spent most of the money left to her by her grandfather on her pets. "Why did you hide this?" Timothy was surprised. "I understand if you were a member of a mafia family or the daughter of criminals. Your parents are just wealthy people. You have no idea what you're talking about at all." Noelle was not amused. "You just don't know such people. They look at those who have a lower income and social status as plebeians, and this is arrogance, constant pomposity. You have no idea how difficult it is for me with them." Timothy grew up in love and trust, in a family where people always respected others regardless of their social status. It was wild for him to hear such things from Noelle. But Noelle continued her conversation. It turned out that she was the daughter of a famous businessman, Paul Fisher. Unlike their eldest son, the girl had always been the black sheep in the family, which they tried hard to repaint. When she left the second year of the most prestigious university and went to study as a veterinarian, her parents announced that they didn't want to know their daughter, and they wouldn't give her a penny until she came to her senses and returned to school. Can you imagine? Since childhood, I dreamed of healing animals, but they wanted me to become a diplomat, Noelle said. "Tell me, please, what is the passion of people to cut everyone into a comb? What do you need to be happy?" "I haven't really thought about it. What I want is for you to be by my side, for my mother not to be sick, for me to have a job that I love, for my friends to be loyal, for us to have a family and kids, and also for there to be no wars," Timothy replied. "Well said. But the values of my family are wholly different. I'm afraid to even imagine what will happen if they find out what I do besides studying at the veterinary school. Volunteers are ranked somewhere between beggars and layabouts by them, and they consider us almost the most useless people. They're ashamed of me, just because I had the courage to follow my dream, my own dream, not someone else's." Noelle was terribly nervous. She couldn't bring herself to tell Timothy that she couldn't introduce him to her parents, because both he and his mother were considered lower class by them. This thought was unbearably cruel and disgusting. Noelle literally hated her relatives for the way they divided people, worthy and unworthy of attention, kings of life and their servants. As long as she still lived with her parents, she constantly had to find excuses to avoid meeting decent guys whom her mother tried to set her up with. "Noelle, where are you running away to again, my dear? My friend Helena and her son will be here soon. Do you remember Craig? Such a charming young man. I think you should take a closer look at him. His family has 3 car dealerships in the city centre, a chain of car washes throughout the region, and real estate in Nice." "Yes, and Craig has a woman in every French town, Mum. I'm not judging, Mum, don't get me wrong. It's not my business, and let him live the way he wants." "But why are you trying to marry me off to him? You don't care if we're happy, as long as we have money, right?" 3 years had passed since Noelle started her independent life. She was finishing her studies. Her parents had almost resigned themselves to the fact that their family had its own black sheep and had placed all their hopes for decent, in their understanding, offspring solely on Noelle's older brother. He fully corresponded to all their ideas about what young people in their circle should be like. He graduated from a prestigious university. Then the father took him to work in his company, taught him everything, and prepared his replacement. In the last year, the father's health had deteriorated significantly. Unfortunately, he had no idea that his son would become a gambler and that in just a few years he would be proud of his daughter and curse the day when he decided to entrust his company to his son, who would soon lose everything that his father had achieved in his entire life. But that would be later, and right now, Noelle had no time for her parents and their moralizing. She loved Timothy with all her heart. They often rode together on the bike, and Noelle, clinging to her fiancé with all her body, felt like the happiest person on earth. However, Noelle still had an important conversation with her parents ahead of her. She needed to tell them about her upcoming wedding and introduce them to Timothy. To prepare for the conversation, she became a model daughter for a few days, attending family dinners and events she previously ignored. "Mum, I wanted to talk to you today. Our conversation will be serious, so don't plan anything for tonight. I've already invited my guest, and I want you to meet him without any extra witnesses," she warned her mother in advance. "Sweetie, are you bringing a groom?" Her mother's face showed obvious interest, which was immediately replaced by suspicion. "Is he from a decent family? Who is he? I hope we won't be ashamed of your choice." "Mum, please don't start." "I sense a catch here. Who is this man?" "Timothy. He's an ordinary guy. He's not a banker or a businessman. His mum and he only have a 2-room apartment in a residential area and an old motorcycle. But I love Timothy, and I really want you to accept him as your own." "Motorcycle? 2-room apartment? Does he live with his mother? What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? There can be no talk of any Timothy in our house, not even for a second. And this ragamuffin won't have his foot in our house." "Fine, Mum. Then I'm a ragamuffin too, just like Timothy. By the way, Mum, I've been a volunteer all this time. I did all kinds of dirty work, you know. I cleaned up after flea-infested dogs and treated cats with ringworm," said Noelle, who decided to set the record straight once and for all. From that day on, she never appeared at her parents' house again, rented out her apartment, and moved in with Timothy. After defending her diploma, Noelle got a job at a veterinary clinic and under the guidance of Mrs. Oliphant learned to bake pies. She enjoyed taking care of him and secretly dreamed of a baby who would look like her beloved. Time passed and they prepared for the wedding together. They worked hard and Timothy managed to get a good job as a manager in a good company. They were still far from having a lot of money, but they didn't dream of having a lot. They believed that together, with their persistence and hard work, they could overcome all difficulties. An unexpected call distracted Noelle from preparing dinner. "It's probably Timothy getting back from work. Apparently, he just wants to ask what to buy for tea. I'll ask him to buy a cake to celebrate the big news," thought Noelle and smiled at her thoughts. Timothy did not know yet that tonight there was a big surprise waiting for him. Noelle was pregnant. But an unknown number appeared on the phone. Noelle answered the call, and at that moment, Mrs. Oliphant saw her future daughter-in-law turn deadly pale and stagger, leaning against the wall. Noelle gasped for air silently, unable to speak. Mrs. Oliphant took the phone and heard, "He's in the intensive care unit right now. He needs urgent surgery. His life is in danger." Not understanding anything, Mrs. Oliphant asked, "Who are you talking about?" The voice on the other end of the line explained. Timothy Oliphant was brought by ambulance to the intensive care unit of the 3rd hospital. "You need to come to us as soon as possible. Apparently, he will need to be transported to the capital." The women had no time for fear and tears. the surgery in the capital would demand a big sum of money. So they both ran around the apartment, gathering everything valuable that could be pawned. Noelle took all the money she and Timothy had saved for their wedding and rushed to the hospital with Mrs. Oliphant. Of course, they were not allowed into the intensive care unit. Only after 2 hours of excruciating waiting, the doctor finally came out and explained that Timothy was hit by a car on his way back from work. He was riding a motorcycle and was cut off by a speeding driver. The injuries were all over his body, but the most serious was the damage to his brain. We assess his condition as extremely severe, critical. We provided emergency care to the victim, stopped the bleeding. I'm not certain that our neurosurgeons are competent enough to help Timothy. I would advise you to try to go to a clinic with one of the most experienced neurosurgeons in the country, but I'm warning you right away that it's a lot of money. So if you want to save the life of your son and husband, look for them urgently. Mrs. Oliphant burst into tears when she saw the amount of money required. Even if she sold the apartment, she knew she could not collect that much money in time. Please don't cry. I'll try to get it. I'll sell my apartment. It's more expensive. We'll save Timothy. But there was simply no time and strength to deal with realtors and all the formalities at the time, and Noelle decided to turn to her parents. She was ready for any humiliation before them, just so they would give her money on credit and help save the father of her future child. She stormed into her parents' house with her hair dishevelled, tearful and blushing. Her appearance scared her relatives, but they were too angry with their daughter to rush to her and ask what had happened. "Why are you bursting into the house like a crazy person?" her father asked sternly, as if nothing had happened. "Dad, I really need money. My Timothy is dying. He urgently needs surgery in the capital. Please save him. Give me money on credit, only on credit. I'll sell my apartment, I'll pay everything back. But I need it urgently, very urgently. Do you understand?" "You left home. You abandoned your father and mother. And now you want to talk to us about money that you always despised." Her father's nostrils flared with anger. "You won't get a penny from me. Let your boyfriend die. It'll be better for everyone." Noelle looked at her father with disbelief. She was used to his arrogance, but she never expected to hear such terrible, soulless words from him. She turned to her mother and saw the cold indifference in her eyes. Her mother shook her head and said, "Your father is right. You have no right to ask us for money. You betrayed us when you got involved with that ragamuffin. We hope your madness will pass soon, and we're not going to interfere in that man's troubles." Her parents walked past her and left the room in silence, clarifying it for Noelle that pleading with them was useless. She already knew this, as well as the fact that she had lost her parents forever. She ran out of the house, realizing she would never return. "Nicole, my dear," a voice came from the garden. Under the open window of the living room, where the most disgusting conversation of her life had just taken place, Noelle saw her grandmother, the only person in their family whom she loved and who had always been on her side. "I heard your conversation. My son is very upset with you. He doesn't understand how cruel he's being, but he just wants you to obey his will," the elderly woman said, as if justifying her son. "And I don't want you to suffer. Look what I have." She handed Noelle a gold credit card that she always kept in a small purse. "Do you know that your grandfather left us an inheritance? Less for you," the old woman smiled slyly, "and more for me. He was a smart man and understood that young people couldn't be given fish. It's enough to give them a fishing rod so that they can learn to catch it themselves. But sometimes there are moments in life when we have to act quickly and help each other. I haven't spent my money. I haven't even withdrawn the interest. I don't need much. I think a decent amount has accumulated there. I don't need it, but you and Timothy have to live. Take this money and save your beloved."
"Grandma, my dear, may God bless you. I will be forever grateful to you,"
Noelle cried, kissing the elderly woman. Without wasting a minute, she jumped into the waiting taxi and rushed to the hospital, holding the card close to her heart, as if it were the most precious treasure. Her beloved's life depended on this piece of plastic right now. "You're too late. There's no hope." The doctor's cold voice stopped her in the corridor. "There's no point in calling a helicopter. It won't make this flight. It's better to take care of the funeral. Most likely Timothy won't live until morning." Mrs. Oliphant sat on a chair in silence and stared at one point. She had no strength to cry anymore. She was in a stupor. But the doctor's words angered Noelle. "No, he won't die," she shouted, and pushing the doctor and the nurse aside, burst into the intensive care unit. She was looking for her Timothy. Ignoring the staff's attempts to stop her, Noelle burst into the rooms and wards until she found him. Timothy lay wrapped up, looking very pale. The artificial respiration machine provided him with oxygen. His heart was still beating, and he was in a deep coma. Even a non-specialist could tell that life was leaving his young body. Carefully, as if afraid to wake her beloved, Noelle approached and lay down next to him. His body was warm and familiar, but now so helpless and inert. Noelle hugged Timothy by the neck, brought her lips to his face, and whispered hotly in his ear,
"Timothy, my dear, live. Please, fight. Believe that you can hear me and put all your love and hope into every word. Timothy, my beloved, we need you very, very much. Remember, I promised you a surprise. So, you will become a father. Do you hear me? You will be a father."
Her voice became louder and louder until she literally shouted into Timothy's ear,
"Wake up, Timothy! I'm pregnant!"
And a miracle happened. Timothy heard her. The readings on the monitor began to change. His pulse and pressure increased, and his eyelashes twitched.
"Faster! Come here! He's alive! He hears me!"
Noelle shouted, calling for doctors to help. Everything started moving, and after a couple of hours, the grandmother's credit card paid for Timothy's transportation by helicopter. In the capital, the operating table was already waiting for him. Hours of waiting passed, with no guarantees of successful completion of the complex operation. Only Noelle believed that Timothy would not abandon them with the baby, that he would fight, and they would be happy together. She held Mrs. Oliphant's hand and calmed her down. "I believe, and you should believe too. Timothy is strong. He will fight. Now he knows we will have a baby, and he will try his best." Timothy survived. He literally crawled back from the other world. After a month, they were all back home together. Even the lop-eared bandit, temporarily left in the care of volunteer friends, was nearby again. He tried to lick Timothy's face, and his wagging tail spoke more eloquently than any words about how happy he was to see his owner again. Months of rehabilitation, the birth of the baby, and so much joint effort. This year, although it was tough, once again showed Noel and Timothy how close and dear they are to each other.
"Gabriel, we have twins!" cried Valerie over the phone. "They were born small, only 2.5 kilograms each, but they're healthy and they're so cute."
Tears of joy streamed from the young mother's eyes. Finally, she held her babies in her arms. Valerie's pregnancy was a difficult ordeal. Firstly, the father of her children, Gabriel, was initially against their birth. Valerie and Gabriel worked together. She was an accountant and he was a driver at a small company. It wouldn't be accurate to say that an all-consuming passion or love had ignited between them. They were just young and saw each other often. That's how their relationship started. Before that, Gabriel had broken up with his fiancée, even though their wedding date had already been set. Debbie had cheated on him with their mutual friend, and Gabriel found out when he saw her kissing him in a car. The wedding was naturally cancelled, and Gabriel was looking for an opportunity to forget and distract himself. Valerie, new accountant in his company, happened to be in the right place at the right time. The young woman never enjoyed any particular popularity among the male population. Her bright red hair, sticking out in all directions, and freckles all over her face made her look like Pippi Longstocking. Plus, she was overweight, which she fought with since schooltime with varying success. Sometimes she won, sometimes cakes and chocolates did. Gabriel was the first guy with whom she had a real long-lasting relationship. Naturally, Valerie plunged into it head first, falling in love with all her heart. At first, Gabriel tried to hide his relationship with Valerie. He would wait for her after work behind the office. They wouldn't appear in crowded places. They would either go to the river or sit in a gazebo in the park. However, since they lived in a small town, everything soon became obvious. Gabriel's acquaintances would ask him about his relationship with the new accountant, and the guy, to spite his ex-fiancée, would brag to everyone about his great love for Valerie. These rumours reached Valerie as well. She was very flattered that Gabriel boasted of their passionate love everywhere. The girl believed his real love. Or, to be more accurate, she took wishful thinking for reality. Valerie was originally from a neighbouring village. In town, she had graduated from vocational school and worked, living with her aunt, an unmarried elderly woman. They lived well, each on their own. Her aunt was used to being alone, so Valerie's constant presence bothered her a little. However, the fact that Valerie brought home bags full of groceries and cooked for them herself somewhat softened her not-so-welcoming attitude. When her aunt found out that her niece was dating a guy, she was happy. She had a chance to marry off her beloved relative. One day, Nina found a pregnancy test with 2 stripes. And recently, the woman often noticed that her niece was nauseous in the mornings. But the girl didn't mention anything about the wedding. All this prompted her aunt to get to know Valerie's prospective fiancé's family. And it turned out that Nina knew Gabriel's mother. They had studied in parallel classes. The woman did not hesitate to visit her future relative. Gabriel's mother worked as a saleswoman in a store. It turned out that Gabriel's mother, Mrs. Travers, did not know that her son had found a girlfriend, and the fact that she was pregnant plunged Mrs. Travers into shock. The conversation with Nina gave rise to a serious conversation with Gabriel. "Son, it turns out you have a fiancé, and I still thought you were mourning for Debbie," expressed his mother. "Fiancé? No, I'm just going out with a girl, but it's nothing serious, and Debbie has nothing to do with this at all." "Nothing serious, you say? Then why does the whole town know about it? And why did her aunt come to talk about the wedding?" The mother did not give up. "About the wedding? Strange, we were not thinking about any wedding." The man was bewildered. "You're the one who hadn't thought, but your Valerie is pregnant, and she, of course, is thinking about the wedding. I think it's time for me to meet your future wife." So Gabriel found out that he would become a father in the foreseeable future. "Valerie, why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" Gabriel asked at the next meeting. "I was afraid." The woman avoided his gaze. "What if you don't want this child? What am I supposed to do then?" At the moment, Gabriel could not say no to her because all their relatives already knew about Valerie's pregnancy. Anyway, a month later, Valerie married Gabriel. They did not have a wedding. They just got married and had a festive dinner in a large gazebo in the yard of Gabriel's parents. At a family meeting, it was decided that the young couple would live with Gabriel's parents. They had a large 2-story house in which there was a place for their son and his wife. Gabriel's older sister and her husband had long lived in the city, and of course she came to her brother's wedding. "Gabriel," she took her brother aside, "I don't understand how you could replace Debbie for her." The sister looked at Valerie, who in a light beige dress seemed immeasurable. The mother-to-be had visibly gained weight, her freckles were even more visible on her pale face, and her grey eyes seemed faded in the sun, almost transparent. "Debbie cheated on me. It was her choice, not mine," Gabriel answered. "I saw her yesterday when I went to the store," Kate said quietly. "She is very sorry it turned out that way. She swears that she had nothing with Carlos, that she loves only you. Have you even talked to her?" "What am I supposed to talk to her about? I saw her kissing Carlos in the car. Kate, they made a fool out of me." Gabriel was indignant. "And now you're making a fool out of yourself," the sister exclaimed. She categorically did not like this unremarkable, quiet girl, who was no match for Debbie, with whom Kate had long been friends. Meanwhile, Valerie was on cloud 9 of happiness. She was marrying her beloved man. She was absolutely not worried that her husband's sister was looking at her unkindly. That Gabriel himself was sullen, and not at all like a happy newlywed. The young woman simply enjoyed her happiness. She really loved Gabriel, and besides, she was pregnant with his child. The mother-in-law treated her pregnant daughter-in-law well, especially when an ultrasound showed that she was expecting twins. Gradually, Mrs. Travers learned from Valerie about how they met with Gabriel and how their relationship developed. It became increasingly clear that her son married her out of spite for his ex-fiancé. Gabriel remained completely indifferent to Valerie. He was not interested in her well-being, did not kiss her, did not hug her unnecessarily, did not show his feelings. He also tried not to mention the future babies, as if the mere mention of them was unpleasant to him. After a while, Gabriel began to stay at work more and more often. The young wife seemed not to notice any of this. She would have continued to live in her magical invented world if one day an attractive blonde had not approached her in the store. Valerie knew that strange woman had once dated Gabriel. She was flattered that Gabriel married her instead of Debbie. True, she did not know what caused this. "Yes, now I understand, Gabriel," the stranger said mockingly, examining Valerie from all sides. Valerie shrunk under her gaze. She knew she didn't look her best. A blurry figure, shapeless dress, freckles and pigmented spots on her face. Not the most attractive appearance. "What do you mean?" Valerie asked. "I understand why he's in no hurry to come home," the woman laughed. "You know who I am, don't you?" "I know you're my husband's ex-girlfriend," Valerie said, trying to remain calm. "Well, not quite an ex," Debbie said, smiling at her interlocutor. "Gabriel was wrong to marry you. You have nothing in common." "What do you mean, nothing? What about the kids?" Valerie exclaimed. "Well, except for the kids. But does he really need them? You decided everything yourself. And in vain." Valerie stopped listening after that. She felt sick. Her stomach ached so much that she barely made it home, where she was picked up by an ambulance. And now she was calling him from the maternity hospital to glad him with giving birth to their sons. "Gabriel, come over to us," Valerie asked her husband. You can see the kids. They look a lot like you." Gabriel muttered something into the phone and the connection was cut. Valerie tried not to think about what had happened. She had their sons in her arms. He wouldn't abandon his babies. So, in a couple of days, Valerie returned home with her sons. They named the boys Kevin and George, after Valerie and Gabriel's fathers. The babies were very restless, and they each had their own schedule. When Kevin fell asleep, George woke up and demanded to be fed. As soon as George calmed down, Kevin started to cry and demand attention. Valerie was exhausted. She was torn between two babies. If it weren't for her mother-in-law's help, she wouldn't have coped. Mrs. Travers took time off to help her daughter-in-law with the children. Then she arranged with Valerie's mother, and they took turns looking after the grandchildren, helping Valerie. The young father tried not to approach the children unnecessarily. He still worked and came home late. He didn't share where he spent his spare time. "Son," said Mrs. Travers, filling Gabriel's bowl with soup, "what are you doing? The whole town is buzzing that you're involved with Debbie again. Wasn't it enough that she cheated on you, and that you have a wife and little sons at home? Doesn't bother you at all?" "No, it doesn't bother me." Gabriel looked at his mother without averting his gaze. "I don't care about them at all. I don't love Valerie, and as for the kids, well, she wanted them, so let her take care of them." "What do you mean you don't love her?" His mother didn't give up. "Why did you marry her then?" "It just happened. I was foolish and wanted to get back at Debbie. I got married for nothing, I admit it." "What do we do now? Your Debbie won't change. She'll keep looking at other men. And what about Valerie and the kids? This is your children and my grandchildren, your own blood." "Mum, leave me alone, will you? I don't know what to do next. We messed up, and now—" Valerie, standing behind the door, clamped her mouth shut with her hand so as not to scream. She heard everything her husband said. She tried not to remember that conversation with Debbie, tried to convince herself that it was all untrue, that Gabriel loved her. But it turns out that it wasn't like that at all. Debbie wasn't lying. "Valerie, what are you doing? Where are you going in the middle of the night?" Mrs. Travers watched, at a loss, as her daughter-in-law tearfully threw her and her children's things into a large travel bag. "I'm going to my parents. I can't stay here anymore. He doesn't love me. He's dating her," the young woman sobbed. Mrs. Travers tried to calm her down, but she didn't know what to say. "Valerie, your father drinks and your grandmother can't walk. They're all in the same house. How long will you manage with the children? Don't make things up. Everything will work out somehow. Where will you go?" The mother-in-law tried to persuade her daughter-in-law to stay. "Stay," Gabriel said confidently. "I made a mess. I'll go." Both his mother and wife turned to him. "Where will you go?" Valerie asked her husband. "What difference does it make to you? We won't file for divorce yet. Live here. My mother will help you with the children, and the conditions are better here. And I'll rent a place to live. I work, after all. I'll also help you with money for the children," Gabriel said. "Yes, Valerie, stay, please," Mrs. Travis repeated. "Let the one who caused this mess clear it up." Gabriel left that same evening, but he never rented a place. He just moved in with Debbie, his former girlfriend, who had her own apartment. Everyone in town gossiped that he had left his wife and newborn children and moved in with his mistress. Many didn't understand why Gabriel's mother took his wife's side, not her son's. Debbie didn't like it either. "Gabriel, but that's foolish," she protested. "We're living together like a married couple, but I can't go to your place. Valerie and her children are there. Why won't your mother kick them out? Who does she love more, her own son or some other woman?" "It's not about Valerie, it's about the children. My mother is attached to her grandchildren. They're still little. She worries that Valerie will have a hard time alone, so she's trying to help her." Gabriel justified his mother. "She should be trying to help you instead. Your parents aren't poor people, and we have to squeeze into my tiny apartment while your Valerie is almost landlady of their 2-story house. Debbie was angry, but she couldn't do anything. Everything was decided for her. Meanwhile, Valerie gradually began to come to her senses. In principle, she didn't have time to relax and fall into depression. The babies had started teething, and there was even less peace in the house. Kevin and George now slept exclusively outside or in someone's arms, so the household members had a hard time. But the children were growing up little by little, and life was improving. Gabriel, as promised, gave half of his salary to his wife and children. He still felt guilty. He rarely came home. He was ashamed to look Valerie and his mother in the eye. The perpetually screaming infants didn't inspire him either. However, it turned out that living on his own was not as sweet as he had hoped. Firstly, the money he earned was catastrophically insufficient, especially since Debbie was used to living without denying herself anything. The girl also worked, but believed that her salary was hers alone, while Gabriel's salary was joint. Debbie wasn't an ideal housewife either. She didn't cook 3-course lunches like his mother did. She often forgot to wash and iron her beloved's clothes. In general, she didn't rush to surround Gabriel with care and love. She waited for him to do that for her. But the man thought that by leaving his family, he had shown Debbie that life with her was his conscious choice. That should have made her happy, in his opinion. However, it was clearly not enough for Debbie. Quarrels between them became more frequent. Debbie wanted not just to live with Gabriel, but to be the full-fledged mistress of his house, although it was his parents' house. "I think it's time for Valerie to go home, Gabriel. You're not planning on living with her, are you?" Debbie asked him. "Of course, I'm not planning on living with her. I live with you. However, I'm not going to throw Valerie and the kids out either. As I've already said, I'll earn for us. Valerie and the kids can live with my parents." "But why?" Debbie exclaimed. "Because she's my wife, and her kids are my kids too." "Well, then get a divorce, and let her go in all directions." "Firstly, no one will divorce us until the children turn 1. Second, even after the divorce, they won't stop being my sons. I'm not going to kick them out, especially since it's my parents' house, and my mother suggested they live there." "This can't go on forever," Debbie protested, although they had only been living together for 4 months. Within a year, Kevin and George had calmed down a bit. They started sleeping peacefully at night, and they started walking in different directions. It was fortunate that the yard was fenced, otherwise the boys would have to be searched all over the town. One day, Gabriel and his father built a sandbox and hung swings on the plot. Now the kids had a place to play. After hard work, Mrs. Travers invited everyone to the table. "You've lost weight, son." She looked sadly at Gabriel. "I have to work a lot. Sometimes I don't have time to eat," the man replied, lowering his eyes. He didn't want to tell his mother that Debbie didn't cook at all, and they usually ate semi-finished products. When Gabriel had time, he cooked food for himself and Debbie. However, lately work had increased. The season, so he often just stayed hungry because he didn't have time to cook. When he returned home, he often found Debbie sleeping and the fridge was empty. Sometimes he just didn't have the strength to cook or wait delivery, and he got sleep hungry. At this moment, Valerie entered the dining room. Gabriel hadn't seen her in a long time. When he visited his parents, the woman tried not to cross paths with him. Gabriel, of course, didn't insist on meeting her either. So now, Gabriel even whistled in surprise. His wife had changed beyond recognition. No, Valerie still had unruly red hair, but now it was tied back in a thick braid. Her face was still covered with freckles, but now they were not so bright and, on the contrary, gave the young woman an irresistible charm. And Valerie had lost weight. Early in the spring, when they last saw each other, he also noticed it. But then Valerie was wearing a bulky jacket and it wasn't so noticeable. Now, a slender, attractive, red-haired woman with huge grey eyes like the sky before a storm, stood in front of Gabriel. To say that he was surprised would be an understatement. He looked at his wife and didn't recognize her. "You've changed," he said, and hurried to add, "for the better." And he himself realized how futile his words sounded. It was difficult to call them a compliment. "Thank you," Valerie said quietly. Her eyes shone with warm light and calmness. She had found herself as a mother. For now, that was enough for her. "Maybe the boys need something else. Tell me, don't be shy. I'm always happy to help." Gabriel didn't take his eyes off Valerie. She smiled and Gabriel smiled back. "Honestly speaking, I came to get water for them. But let's go to the kids. You meet them better," the woman said. Gabriel went out to the street with Valerie. It was the first time he had spent over an hour walking with the kids. He even talked and joked around with them. "You know, Paul," said Gabriel's mother, watching from the window as her son tossed Kevin and George up in the air one by one. The boys, Gabriel and Valerie, all laughed heartily. "I think they can still get along." "He's not having an easy time with Debbie," Gabriel's father agreed. "It's one thing to date, but living together is an entirely different story. She's a lady who wants money, but Gabriel's too proud to admit it." Mrs. Travers nodded. She knew the best friend of their eldest daughter very well. The wise mother knew what Debbie was after and understood that Valerie would be the best wife for her son, but unfortunately it was not up to her to choose. Gabriel left in the evening. His meeting with Valerie awakened old memories and something else he didn't quite understand yet. "Why did it take so long?" Debbie protested. "We were supposed to go to karaoke today. I called you 100 times and you kept ignoring me. Do you want to go back to your fat, ugly ex? Tell me." "Listen, Debbie, I'm so tired. Let's not argue right now. And I don't want to go anywhere. Let's stay home, watch a movie or something. My mum gave me some cabbage pies," Gabriel suggested. "You know, Gabriel, I think it's time for you to retire. I've been waiting for you all day, getting ready, dressing up to go to the cinema." Debbie was angry. "If you don't want to come, I'll go by myself." And so it turned out. Gabriel stayed home while Debbie went to the karaoke bar. "Just wait, I'll show you," the girl hissed, dialing Carlos's number. Every weekend, Gabriel now spent with his wife and kids. He came up with all sorts of excuses for Debbie, and she became more and more upset. Eventually, Gabriel said that he just wanted to see his sons grow up. Debbie didn't talk to him for several days. "If you want this so badly, go back to your wife and see them every day," she said angrily. "I'll think about it," Gabriel replied as if in jest. Meanwhile, the relationship between Gabriel and Valerie gradually improved. They talked about their children, life, common acquaintances, and plans for the future. "Maybe we should get a divorce?" Valerie asked one day. "You're living with another woman. Maybe you want to make it official with her. The kids are grown up now, so we can get divorced without any problems. If you'd like to." "Let's not rush," whispered the man quietly. "After all, we have 2 children. Maybe we will raise them together." Gabriel looked directly into Valerie's eyes. She did not look away. She remained silent, although her heart was pounding in her chest. Yes, she still loved her husband. She loved him despite everything that had happened between them. And even though her friend, whom she had once confided in, had criticized her, saying that she had no pride, for Valerie, love was more important. The young woman was going to use all the chances that life gave her. Valerie knew that she would only be happy with Gabriel. And pride? Well, then she had no pride. That evening, Gabriel did not go home. He called Debbie, saying that he urgently needed to go on a business trip. She probably didn't believe him. The man didn't clarify. "I am cheating on my mistress with my own wife," he thought, falling asleep in Valerie's embrace. As for Valerie, she was glad that, at the moment, Gabriel was with her, that love and adoration could be read in his eyes. That was enough for the woman. The young man's parents pretended that nothing strange had happened. The next day, Gabriel came to get his things. Debbie was furious. She was figuring things out, but then abruptly calmed down, and from there, Gabriel packed his things in silence. Without saying goodbye, she closed the door behind him, picked up her phone, and dialed a familiar number. If one man couldn't afford to provide her with a beautiful life, she would have to let another do it. Recently, Carlos suggested she accompany him. He was flying to Turkey for a vacation. Debbie hesitated because she wasn't certain about her relation with Gabriel, but now she agreed without hesitation. Seeing Gabriel with the suitcase, Valerie threw herself at him, crying with happiness. And again, Gabriel felt like a hero, giving happiness to his family. His parents watched the family reunion, smiling. "You were right, dear," the elderly man remarked. "Gabriel did come back to his wife." "I'm always right, dear," his wife smiled. "Yes, Carlos, I will marry you," Debbie answered her companion, smiling as if nothing had happened. After a few minutes, looking at the beautiful diamond ring given to her by the man. "And love? Well, it's not always a guarantee of happy relationships," Debbie thought, staring into the distance. "Without love, it's somehow easier, not so stressful." Meanwhile, on the other side of Earth, Valerie was thinking oppositely. "Love is the most important thing. My love saved our marriage." She was basking in her husband's embrace and still couldn't believe her happiness. Each of these women was right in her own way.